this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Hi, it's Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And today I'm talking with my dear friend, Krista Williams.
It can change you in the best way possible. Dance with the change, dance with the breakdowns.
The embodiment of Pisces intuition with Capricorn power moves.
So I'm like delusionally proud of my chart.
Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd. In 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
But here's the thing. Bachelor fans hated him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
That's when his life took a disturbing turn. A one-night stand would end in a courtroom.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, The Case of Lucy Letby, we unpack the story of an unimaginable tragedy that gripped the UK in 2023. But what if we didn't get the whole story?
Evidence has been made to fit.
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapsed.
What if the truth was disguised by a story we chose to believe?
Oh my God, I think she might be innocent.
Listen to Doubt, The Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Special Agent Regal, Special Agent Bradley Hall.
In 2018, the FBI took down a ring of spies working for China's Ministry of State Security, one of the most mysterious intelligence agencies in the world.
The Sixth Bureau podcast is a story of the inner workings of the MSS and how one man's ambition and mistakes opened its vault of secrets.
Listen to The Sixth Bureau on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey everybody, Robert Evans here, and I wanted to let you know this is a compilation episode. So every episode of the week that just happened is here in one convenient and with somewhat less ads package for you to listen to in a long stretch if you want. If you've been listening to the episodes every day this week, there's going to be nothing new here for you, but you can make your own decisions.
Robert, do you want to grunt so we can start the podcast?
I think we should just start the podcast with you asking, Robert, do you want to grunt so we can start the podcast? That seems avant-garde. I don't know what avant-garde means, but this is It Could Happen Here, a podcast about how things are falling apart and how maybe they don't always need to be falling apart. Maybe we could do better. Speaking of doing better, you know, one thing that sometimes helps us do better, getting in the face of people fucking shit up and being like, hey, that's not cool. Don't be doing that. Garrison, that's your lead-in. Take it from here.
Yeah, hi. I've been trying to keep a better job of like following ecological defense movements happening both in the States and in other countries. I know there was a big one up in Canada recently.
There was a huge one in Germany too, just the other day.
Yeah. I know the one in Canada. There's I forget what the actual indigenous group is called. Maybe someone else.
Oh, the Haudenosaunee? Sante?
The people who took back their land and blocked the road off, and now they are
the Unistoten, and the Wet'suwet'en.
Oh yeah.
Yes, thank you.
There we go.
Yeah, basically taking their land back and blocking off the road, and now RCMP is getting called in, and we'll see how that develops.
Yeah, and in Guatemala, there's protests against Canadian mining in Maya indigenous community that have gotten pretty heavily militarized at this point. So that's fun.
There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff on the ecological defense side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Including in the Pacific Northwest here with all of the forests and such in this area. And part of this kind of exploration into ecological defense, I wanted to talk with some people who are a little bit more well versed in this type of thing than I am, So there's two people have agreed to talk with us. Sam and Kat, both people who work on this kind of thing from like an activism standpoint. Say hi.
Hello.
Hey, y'all.
So very, very thankful that they are going to be talking with us today. So I thought we could probably just start by kind of discussing what forest defense is and how it kind of has a history, specifically in this area, but kind of more broadly. Like if people listened to the Earth First episodes, that covered like anti-pipeline stuff, but we didn't really get much into like forest defense and like the traditional like tree sits and that kind of thing. So yeah, what's up with defending the forest? What's going on with that?
Yeah, thanks for that great intro. Forest defense is, I think, probably the most characteristic type of direct action in this bioregion. And here we're talking from Cascadia right now. I actually moved out here from the East Coast 10 years ago, specifically to get involved with forest defense because this place has an incredibly rich history of people basically just throwing down, risking life and limb to stop chainsaws from taking down some of the oldest and most special forests out here. And so I'd say, forest defense direct action is in a lot of ways rooted right here in this bioregion. And obviously, like all kinds of movements, things have changed over the course of time. Back in the 80s and 70s, when forest defense was really, really kicking up and stopping old growth logging specifically out here, when it was kind of like rampant old growth clear cutting, it really took the shape of focusing on ecology, focusing on the integrity of these ecosystems, and basically like doing everything possible to stop the chainsaws. And now, obviously, a lot has changed. We have the Northwest Forest Plan and some policies which are doing better to kind of like protect old places and old forests, but at the same time, the same shit is happening. The timber industry is great at using euphemisms to kind of cover up its clear cutting anyways and finding policy loopholes to target some incredible places. And now I think where we're at with like the direct action movement is we're in the context of climate change. So we're not just defending forests for the sake of these like incredible ecological strongholds, but we're also defending them because we recognize that forest defense is climate defense. This is a like environmental justice issue. It's a human issue. It's a community issue. And so now direct action, I think, is, happening not just in the name of our forest, but in the name of our communities and our future. But it's just as rich now as it has ever been. And especially right now, and especially since the 2020 fires, which I know we'll get into, people have been throwing down all over this bioregion to protect what's left of our forests.
Yeah, and I think it's good to get into kind of how the fires have impacted this, because one of the shady things that has been done is I think most people in the country are aware Oregon had unprecedented wildfires this year, and we had unprecedented wildfires last year, and we're going to have unprecedented wildfires every year for a while. And whenever these fires run through, they don't like destroy every tree in their wake, but they char them. And logging companies then come in under the guise of like, well, we have to make this area safe so that like the fires don't burn here next year. So we got to cut down all of these trees and clear cut this area of public forest. So like as you're driving around in forests that you used to be able to do stuff in, you'll find areas that are just like blocked off because mining companies are coming or logging companies are coming through and clear cutting all of these trees that could very easily recover from the fire. Or that weren't even burned by it, but were just like in this area that they said, okay, well, we have to clear this out in order to make it safe. And it's kind of this way to like backdoor in the guise of fire protection, like expand logging.
Yeah, and just to add to that too, the logging companies love to say that the reasons we have increased wildfires because there's an overgrowth in the forest because of the Northwest Forest Plan, because there's more protections for the forest. Fires are happening worse because we're not getting there, logging the forest and removing all the fuel.
Mm-hmm. So you have like this two-part thing that like Kat just mentioned, where like on the one hand, companies are like, we need to log more to prevent wildfire, which is bullshit. And we can talk about why. Yeah. And on the other hand, after fires burn through an area, they're like, we need to log because we need to help the forest recover ecologically. Also, we need to salvage all of the timber before it rots and goes bad. And like all of these reasons. And so basically it's just like fire has become the excuse to just like log preemptively and log after the fact. And yeah, it's a total shit show.
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of falls into capitalists trying to use climate change as just another way to find things to extract and things to grow on, right? It's they're going to try to find their own way to sneak in when all of this, ecological disaster is happening to, sell you whatever green safe product is going to help against the collapse, or, package things in a way that makes it seem like it's solving this, problem, but it's actually it's part of the same thing. You
or
see
so
like,
you ethically logged
every
wood
industry.
from the
Yeah, right. It's you see this in every single industry, and it's always it's going to be like this because this is the only way that capitalism knows how to address this issue is by just turning it into another thing to consume and another thing to sell and package. Pretty grim.
Yeah, and
Totally.
there's cascading effects too, because they cut down these trees under the guise of making it safe for the next fire season, but which also makes a big chunk of land a lot more vulnerable to like mudslides and the torrential raining that we're having right now. And that's also going to get more common because that's how fucking climate change works. It's just like the comprehensive fucking.
And let us be clear too that logging doesn't actually work to prevent wildfire. They say that it does, but the kind of logging that they do in the name of wildfire prevention just looks like clear cuts. And we have a pretty robust body of science now showing that those kinds of activities actually make fire hazard more severe for local communities. So that's like one of the things they're doing. And we've been calling it just gaslighting. Like they're gaslighting all of us by saying, there's nothing to see here. There's nothing to see here. We're taking care of you all. We're barely logging at all. And then we've got community members on the ground, despite the closure orders, who are like, actually, there's a lot to see here. And you all are like completely devastating the landscape and further harming our communities. It's total gaslighting.
Yeah, and Oregon has, both in terms of like watching fires and watching logging, some like rules that are not in place in other areas, especially for like even for press and the like. Like it's actually hard to get in to look at this stuff without, breaking some sort of law technically, which is not at all shady. Yeah,
I feel like that's another important thing, and maybe Kat can jump on too, is just basically, I think what people aren't understanding is that after the fires, these federal forest managers closed gates and essentially are converting public land into private land by, using the threat of violence to kick people out if they go onto their public land. And since 2020, and they say until 2023 at least, the only folks allowed behind these gates are cops and loggers. And so this is like literally, the enclosure of our public lands and like the privatization of our public lands so that cops and loggers can do whatever the hell they want.
Yep. And it's the kind of thing, that people, if the Bundys and that group actually meant the stuff they were saying, like the rhetoric they were putting out, it's the kind of thing they would be pissed off about too, because you're right, it is the enclosure of public land by the government and corporations without any kind of consent from the people who are supposed to be the collective owners of that land. It's again, something that a lot of people should be angry about who aren't angry about, because there's been this huge propaganda campaign in the Northwest about timber unity and the like, and like supporting the timber industry by destroying like the single greatest gift this entire part of the world has. It's pretty frustrating.
Yeah.
Frustrating.
Anyway, we have to actually have a quick break so I can go watch my soccer game at the Timber Stadium. Completely unrelated. So I'll be right back.
I'm going to drive out to Wheeler, Oregon myself, but we all have different things to do during the break.
But also in the break, I guess we could probably do an ad break here, because why not? All right.
Yeah, everybody loves ads.
And we're back. Still talking about forest defense.
There's something that people should probably know before we go further about the way that Oregon works. So for a while, Oregon is a place where you can't get elected in a lot of populated parts of Oregon if you're a Republican. So the Republicans just play nice and pretend and like throw out some social justice-y language while still doing all of the extractive stuff they were going to do anyway. And that's the story with like Ted Wheeler and his family. So Ted Wheeler, the mayor of Portland, comes from timber money. His father was a major Republican donor. Not that the Democrats don't have a lot of extractive history behind them, but like it's very obvious what's happening with the Wheelers, where they were huge Republican donors and huge backers of the right. And then Oregon had this kind of switch politically. And so Ted Wheeler just started throwing out nice social justice-y language. But the whole, he's I'm sure going to make a run for governor at some point in the near future. And you've got this like this dressed up, very extractive logging industry and politicians that always find a way to kind of make it seem palatable to the liberal majority. And they've gotten pretty good at that because it doesn't. I don't know. I think maybe we're coming to the end of this period, but like I haven't seen up until this last year a lot of widespread kind of outrage about the clear cutting. And they also hide it pretty well. Like if you're driving through these beautiful public forests in Oregon, the areas that are right along the road will generally be pristine and you'll see old growth and everything. But sometimes you can see as you like turn a corner or something that like, oh, that old growth only goes back a couple of dozen yards, and then it's a clear cut, and they'll hide it so that it's not as obvious because they know it upsets people. So there's this kind of surprisingly thorough campaign to do as much of this as possible without upsetting people, which means there's a potential to upset people, which means there's a potential to actually stop this if enough people get upset. But it's you're going against folks who have thought a lot about how to do this in a way that isn't going to upset the apple cart. So how do you upset the apple cart, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, I think one way that we upset the apple cart is by bringing people out to these places. And, in the action that happened on Tuesday, that looked like disrupting and disobeying a federal closure order in order to bring people out to these places. Basically metaphorically walking behind what you were describing, the beauty strip along the highway and seeing what's behind it. As we were saying earlier, unfortunately, because of all these federal closure orders after the fire, that looks like risking, repercussions, state repression, arrest even, in order to just lay eyes on it. But that is the way that we tip the apple cart. We get people to see these places so that it cuts through the gaslighting that the industry is doing and people can literally viscerally feel and see the damage. And there's no way to convince them that that's okay once they see it.
And how do you go about like finding people to bring into this, convincing people to come? Like, what does kind of that effort look like?
You want to answer this one, Kat? You did a ton of recruitment.
Yeah. Totally. I think a big part of it is getting them while they're young. I think that like young people right now are already pretty radicalized compared to 10 years or so, probably because of, I think, George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and the use of social media in those movements. So I am a college student and we're seeing like so many people coming in and ready to throw down. Like they just cannot wait to get involved and will kind of just show up to anything. So I think that that's like a major tactic for sure. And then also making sure that when you have like an action that you're recruiting people for, that it's very easy to plug in. It's like very accessible and kind of just like having it organized very well. So it's not daunting to come in. Do you want to add to that, Sam?
Well, just to like share a little more about like how we did that with this particular action that happened on Tuesday. Basically, it was a Tuesday, rainy, freezing, middle of the forest. Planning this action did not think, and behind a federal closure order, so everyone on site risking arrest. And planning this action, it felt like we would be lucky as shit if we got 10 people out there. Yeah. But I will say it was easy as shit to get 50 people out there. And that's because people care. And, I think we did, in terms of organizing strategy, we used the affinity group model. And so we had a core, there was a core group of organizers, and those organizers recruited through affinity groups and their affinity groups. And that helped to keep kind of information secure and, everything tightly organized. But people were really desiring to get together and do something, especially like the past couple of years of COVID. People are just like eager to do something. And on top of that, we promised that this isn't just an opportunity to potentially get arrested, but this is an educational opportunity and a movement building opportunity. So while the road was blocked with a slash pile and a fire truck, there were workshops going on. There were hikes going on in the forest that's supposed to be cut. There was discussions about know your rights trainings and affinity groups. We had a band playing on top of a fire truck, and there was a dance party. And basically, we were like building community and solidarity in a positive way while fucking shit up. I think that's the key.
And I mean, where do you, how do you, what is the, let me think of a way to phrase this. What is kind of the next step here? Because they haven't started logging this area yet, but they're kind of doing like the pre-prep work. What do you think actually can be done to halt it? Like, is it a because it seems to me that there's got to be like a mix of tactics there to actually get them to stop, and you're dealing with a number of different threats, including not just at the state level, but these federal closure orders. Like, what does the path forward look like to you?
Yeah, so there's a preliminary injunction being forth by some nonprofits. And so this is a really good example of different tactics coming in. And so the preliminary injunction is basically to state that what they're doing, the Forest Service is doing, is illegal. But before that can be passed, they can come in at any point and log the area. And so that's where direct action comes in, to slow them down and halt them as much as possible until the courts can process that injunction.
And that feels really huge too. Like what Kat just said is like, where is the place of direct action in forest defense? This is like the golden moment for direct action. While there's like an open legal case that we're waiting on a judge to settle, and the timber industry is like coming in ready to moot out the case by logging before it can even be decided. And like, to just add a little bit more backstory too on like another reason why people are so pissed about this is that, this watershed has been, I think, like beloved and also embattled since the 80s. Like the infamous Easter Massacre logging event happened in the same watershed where...
Could you explain? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, totally. In 1989, a timber company was planning to clear-cut log old growth forest out there and started moving on it on Easter in the snow. And a bunch of badass direct action activists set up a 5-tiered blockade on a logging road to hold off the logging, and successfully did for days and days until a bunch of them, I think over a dozen folks, got arrested, thrown in jail, and the forest was clear cut. So hence, the Easter Massacre name. But a ton of folks who, still work in forest defense in the Spire region were there and remember that story and were with us when we were out there this week telling that story. And, since then, between 1989 and now, people have been showing up again and again and again in this watershed because it is so special to try and fight off logging. And myself and Kat have been a part of efforts over the past handful of years to fight off a number of logging projects out there. We were successful in doing that. We actually smacked the Forest Service's grubby hands off of a bunch of old growth because our scrappy friends spent days exploring this watershed and documenting, doing site-specific science, citizen science documentation and giving it to the Forest Service. And we fought them and won and protected a bunch of the forest. And then the fires came through and they closed the gates and they secretly changed all of these contracts to include clear-cut logging. And so that is why there is an open lawsuit, because we believe it's illegal what they're doing. Yeah. God, it's sketchy and illegal. Yeah.
But it does illustrate kind of the depth of the fight necessary, not just in forest defense, but at all efforts of kind of resisting the extractive industries that are driving a lot of climate change. It's not enough. It's never enough to win the first victory. They're going to find some way to swoop around to the flanks and try to take it away from you, like they're doing right now, which is exhausting. It seems exhausting, but it doesn't mean you can ignore it.
It's fucking exhausting.
Yeah.
What I always say is like our federal management agencies, they like suffer from this powerful amnesia where they just like keep coming back with the same bullshit proposals. But like our movement does not suffer from that. And we are just like building power and getting stronger and getting more successful. So like when people left on Tuesday, there was a promise that people will be back if logging happens. And we're very sure that that will be the case.
And if people are in the Cascadian bioregion and are like, well, this sounds pretty sweet. I wanna keep some trees where they are, as opposed to putting them on the back of a truck to drive somewhere else. How could they get involved? Where might they reach out to?
Well, there's a few different groups who were a part of this. Definitely the Portland Rising Tide, Cascadia Forest Defenders. Kat can talk about Climate Justice League and maybe the action that you all put on yesterday as a follow-up and like how folks can get involved with that. But basically, yeah, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and please, keep a lookout because we'll be getting it out far and wide if there is a call for folks to get out there again.
Yeah, and Climate Justice League is an org at the University of Oregon, and people are free to just join the organization. Community members are also involved. But we did put on an event yesterday where Tyler Ferris of Ferris Logging, or Ferris Timber, who is actually the company that bought the rights to Brighton Bush, which was the area where we did the action on Tuesday. He was giving a speech at the University of Oregon to talk about post-fire logging, which was just like crazy timing. They kind of just like put it in our lap. And so we recruited from that action. We're like, let's disrupt the hell out of this talk. And so we like showed up and kind of tried to sneak in. They were having Zoom issues, which like luckily distracted them from the fact that there was like 40 or 50 like pretty punk anarchy looking kids in the room. But we like let him go on for a little bit. And then we started to ask him questions that he obviously didn't know the answer to. We kept like asking questions about, the science says this, but you're stating this, where are you getting your science from? And he kept saying things like, well, that's more of a political question, and the statistics don't really back up what you're saying. And then, yeah, we just chanted and made him really nervous.
Yeah, and as a heads up, if you're looking to win an argument on a Zoom call, you can just say the statistics don't back you up without citing statistics. It's really the easiest way to do that.
I guess I am kind of curious for like, you guys said you've prevented some of this stuff in the past by doing stuff like documentation, and when that kind of thing becomes not enough, this area does have a rich history of kind of direct action stuff to protect forests with, again, also like a mixed success. Like by no means does direct action always work to do anything, right? Now we still have the Line 3 pipeline, we still have all of these things that direct action has tried to prevent, but it turns out a lot of the kind of direct action that's associated with these type of like ecological things is kind of more performative than anything else. Like it is kind of like a tree sit is about gaining media like publicity, because they're gonna get you down, right? Like eventually, and it's gonna be painful, because like you're not gonna be sitting up there for years to prevent the tree from being logged. So how close do you think we are into like reaching that kind of territory, like it was in like the 90s and 80s, where it is like a lot of people like blocking off roads and doing that kind of thing? More like once it crosses into that, it's more like autonomous. It's not like led by a single organization by any means. It's more decentralized. But do you see that kind of happening soon? And how do you think we can balance out direct action with like other like thoughtful means of trying to draw attention to these things, and maybe actually and other things like actually physically preventing the logging of certain areas?
That's such a good question. And I'm really thankful that we're talking about strategy, because kind of like I mentioned, I moved out here like 10 years ago to do forest defense work, and have seen so many instances in where people are trying to do direct action in a time and space where it doesn't make sense, where it's like basically slated to, it's going to lose, because it's just impossible to, as you said, hold this blockade for weeks and weeks and weeks in the snow indefinitely, as they continue to try to log indefinitely. So there's definitely a sweet spot for where the sort of direct action that we're talking about, like blockading, where that is most useful. Yeah. And that sweet spot is definitely when there is another decisive move, like another legal victory that's waiting in the wings. Or, we won one in Washington without a legal victory because we shamed the shit out of the Department of Natural Resources in the Seattle Times. And they were like, whoa, we're sorry. And so direct action held off something until we were able to sufficiently shame them and deter them. But typically they don't shame well. And so typically, we need there needs to be a legal element backing it up. So direct action is a time buyer. But that said, obviously blockading things is not the only type of direct action. And part of the rich history of forest defense in this bioregion is other kinds of more necessarily, discrete kinds of direct action that obviously, I'm not a part of speaking on this radio show, but would publicly, say those things probably need to happen, and I hope they fucking happen.
What I could say is that I've seen these things happening in other places, like in the Atlanta defending forest movement right now. I have seen evidence that individuals not associated with any group are putting spikes in trees, and that is something that is happening, right? And all that takes is one person, right? That's not like a group of 20 people going into the forest to do that. That's like one person in an afternoon, right? So those are the types of single person direct actions, which again, any type of direct action is going to be scary, right? Once you start doing that, that is, that introduces certain things that is kind of more frightening to you as a person. But it is something that is happening in other places. And it has shown to, at the very least, upset the people who are wanting logging to happen. Generally, they're not thrilled when they find these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels I think when it comes down to it, it's about knowing what your goal is with this tactic. In the action that happened this past week, there was an understanding that the goal was to, shine a light on this thing that's happening in secrecy, shame the Forest Service, and build movement building so that we're ready when people need to throw down for real, and that might happen soon. We weren't trying to hold the space for weeks and weeks and weeks. That wasn't the goal. So going in being what kind of an action are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to be decisive? Are we trying to shape the conditions necessary for success and culture build? Are we trying what are we actually trying to do? And then coming away with that.
Having a clear sense of that beforehand, I think really is crucial, because I've definitely observed direct actions where that is not the case and people have not thought those things through, and it becomes the kind of unfun version of chaos, where things don't really get done and you're just kind of sitting around and everyone's kind of slightly miserable because, again, you're in a freezing forest, and no one really knows what the hell they're doing. So definitely having those kind of things thought through beforehand is extremely useful when you're deciding to trudge your way into some cold, dark woods.
Yeah, we're going for chaotic good, not chaotic evil.
Yeah, well, a little bit of chaotic. Well, it depends what we mean by evil. Evil to some people. Anyway, any other kind of historical notes on forest defense, or any other kind of random tidbits you'd like to mention before we close out?
The one thing that I feel is super important to say to people is that forest defense is not just about protecting forests. It's about protecting all of us. Yeah. We know now, forest defense is climate defense. Our forests are our best natural tool for fighting climate change. And also, we need them here. Most of Oregonians, 80%, get their drinking water from forested watersheds. They literally are sustaining all of us. And so, we hope folks join, not just for the sake of being, hippie tree huggers, even though, some of us are, but also because we need to survive as a people and as a planet, and forests are our best way to do that.
It's the cheapest, most advanced form of carbon capture we have yet. So, yeah, it seems kind of asinine to chop that all down to build some shitty sheds.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that's a sode.
Hi, this is Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom loving and different perspectives. And I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Police search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
In 2023, a story gripped the UK, evoking horror and disbelief.
The nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history.
Everyone thought they knew how it ended. A verdict, a villain, a nurse named Lucy Letby.
Lucy Letby has been found guilty.
But what if we didn't get the whole story?
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we follow the evidence and hear from the people that lived it to ask what really happened when the world decided who Lucy Letby was.
No voicing of any skepticism or doubt.
It'll cause so much harm at every single level of the British establishment of this is wrong.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It Could Happen Here, the podcast that occasionally has ads from the Washington State Highway Patrol. On a completely unrelated note, Garrison, you want to talk about the Washington State Highway Patrol today?
I sure would love to talk about our good friends at the Washington State Patrol, because they just they've come up on my radar in an unrelated matter, and
in a
now
completely
we're going to talk
unrelated
about them.
matter. Yeah,
so now we're going to talk about them. Yeah, so this is the show about things falling apart and kind of part of societal and political stuff kind of crumbling. Usually that gets related to some type of law enforcement agency more often than not.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
In terms of like tensions rising and stuff, there's a lot of, force gets exerted via law enforcement. And one such law enforcement, and one such agency that does this is called the Washington State Patrol. So
man, I think I've heard of them before.
I don't know. I just discovered them recently.
Oh, cool.
So they were founded exactly 100 years ago, and they were originally called the Washington State Highway Patrol. Now they're just the Washington State Patrol. They removed highway, but they still do the same thing. They're basically glorified traffic cops who operate all around Washington State. And we're going to talk about some of the ways that they've been making things worse within the past decade. Since they have a 100-year history, I'm sure we can find lots of historical examples. But we're gonna do stuff that is more recent, because this is generally trying to keep things around the current crumbling. And because we're going to talk about police, the first thing we're going to be discussing, oddly enough, is racism.
Oh my god!
Because I know.
Yay!
When you think of Washington State Patrol, that's it's kind of shocking that they might have a race issue. So anyway, 12 years ago, researchers working with the Washington State Patrol found that troopers were searching drivers from minority communities, particularly local Native American tribes, at a much higher rate than white people, and they recommended an additional study, which the Washington State Patrol declined to investigate further. They were like, no more studies. So meanwhile, since then, the troopers have continued to search Native Americans at a rate much higher, more than 5 times than that of white people in the area.
Cool.
Yeah,
that seems. But there are 5 times as there's 5 times as many indigenous people in Washington as white people, right?
There's not. Yeah.
Okay.
So an analysis by Investigate West showed that the patrol continued to do searches at much elevated rates for Black people, Latino, Pacific Islanders, and Natives within Washington State. And yet, when troopers did decide to search white motorists, they were more likely to find drugs and contraband. Which is something the Washington State Patrol actually acknowledges, is that when they search people of minority communities, they are less likely to find illegal things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's nationwide and very, very robust data.
So government records obtained via freedom of information requests and various other public records searches also show that there is a state law that Washington State Patrol is supposed to collect and report semi-annually to the Criminal Justice Training Commission in Washington about race and ethnicity data of motorists stopped by troopers. But so this is supposed to happen semi-annually, but the agency reported those findings only 3 times in the past 15 years.
Oh,
sounds
kind of like the Portland police not doing the things that federally they're supposed to do because they're so violent. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
being out of compliance with a bunch of federal regs.
Three times in 15 years is not semi-annually, based on what I know the term semi-annually to mean.
No, that's semi-decadely.
So, yeah. Based on responses for over 30 public records requests from 3 different agencies looking at Washington State Patrol, and more than 50 interviews with current and former law enforcement officials and people with experience interacting with Washington State Patrol, and also data from millions of traffic stops. All this was looked at. In total, examined about 8 million traffic stops from 2009 to 2015. This is what Investigate West was doing, which is the most recent data available. And the analysis found that it focused on 22,000 incidents of what researchers called high discretion searches. That's when troopers had the most personal leeway to decide whether or not to pull over and search a vehicle. Black drivers were twice as likely to be searched as white drivers, and Latinos and Pacific Islanders were 80% more likely to be searched. Of these incidents where officers had discretion and they could choose whether or not to pull someone over. So it wasn't like they were like obviously speeding or doing like regular, like actually observable traffic violations. This is when like people could choose. When the Investigate West thing got published, they contacted Washington State Patrol, and the spokesperson said that here's the quote. That race was not the only factor when troopers decided whom to search, and that's partially because blacks, Native Americans, and Latinos are more likely to be searched, regardless of how much discretion troopers have. Which that doesn't really make very much sense. I don't know what they mean by that.
Spokesperson.
I don't know what they mean. Is they're more likely to be searched?
Statement?
Yeah,
regardless.
Jesus Christ,
brutal. What the?
Yeah.
Who is that bad at checking the copy?
Which is weird because later on the spokesperson said that we're in a
same person,
same guy.
Oh, cool.
We're in a basic agreement that minorities are searched at higher rates, but we find less contraband. So,
good. Well,
and
at least
he
they
also
admit it.
He also noted that complaints about like a racial bias accounted for little more than 10% of all complaints of the state patrol filed last year. So, I guess he thinks that's a good stat.
Yeah, I'm sure he's proud of that.
Yeah. And another kind of not great thing is that the analysis found that not only are Native Americans more likely to be searched, but most of those searches happen always at like the edges of reservations. The analysis found that the two highest concentration of searches of Native Americans by state troopers are on the US 97, where it encounters a reservation at Olmec, about a mile from its intersection at State Route 155, which is and more than 130 miles south of the same highway enters another reservation. So nearly 1/3 of high discretion searches. So when troopers can decide whether or not to pull someone over, they have more discretion whether they can. So 1/3 of those happen on these two stretches of highway right on the edges of these reservations. So like they're patrolling outside these reservations to specifically do this. There was I saw an interview on this topic that talked to Native Americans in this area, and they're like, yeah, every time we leave the reservation, we get pulled over, but then we watch tons of white motorists go by and no one cares. And they're like, they're just speeding by. It doesn't matter. So yeah, that is the first unsurprising tidbit about an organization who started as a highway patrol is they're gonna pull people over who are not white more often. That is, that's pretty not super
They're
shocking.
They're going to be psyched to do that.
Yeah,
and then make a public statement like "LOL, yup."
Yeah, that does sound a lot like what the Washington State Patrol sounds like. So
horrible.
So that was the first obvious thing. This next part's a little bit more fun. So in 2009, the Washington State Patrol made the decision to fire 8 troopers, which is pretty rare. And the reason why they got fired is because they used fake diplomas to claim pay raises. Yeah.
Oh.
So there was this whole scheme about getting fake diplomas to get the troopers more money. Like individual people. There's this whole operation going on. It resulted in 8 people getting fired. So troopers can boost their pay about 2% by earning a 2-year degree or 4% with a 4-year degree. And there was this group of troopers who just started just forging diplomas.
See, Garrison, this is a separate conversation, but they didn't need to forge diplomas. They could have just become doctors of magic, like you're gonna become.
That is what I've tried to do.
They could have just gotten that religious PhD.
Yeah. So
there's all sorts of fake diploma mills. Come on, Washington State Highway Patrol.
Yeah, do better.
So this is pretty
bastards.
funny. So
yeah.
So the investigation began after federal agents shut down a diploma mill in Spokane. Criminal charges were not filed, but the patrol did decide to fire these 8 troopers. Yeah, so that is one of the more funny things we'll be talking about today. And I think it's time for an ad break.
Yeah. Speaking of funny, here's these ads that may or may not be the people we're talking about.
No, unrelated.
Unrelated. Ah, we're back, which is also unrelated.
Yep. Another thing that's been pretty common around police is that the past few years, they generally don't think COVID is really real. Or
I hate that it is the past few years now.
Oh my
Yeah,
god!
I don't love that.
I
don't love that.
Robert, we're less than a month away from 2022.
Yeah, I hate that it's like.
Yeah.
I mean, fuck. It's like what?
It's almost 2 years.
Almost 10% of your entire life has been COVID.
I'm not going to think about math.
Yeah.
So generally, they don't think COVID's real, and also they think vaccines are the mark of Satan or something.
Yeah, well, obviously they are, but
yeah.
yes.
So in mid-October, this past October, Washington State Patrol announced that 127 of its employees lost their job after the state's COVID-19 vaccine mandate deadline of October 18th. So, unlike the Portland Police Bureau, and many other cities where city officials caved to the demands of the police that vaccine mandates not be extended towards police, this did not happen in Washington, and they actually got it enforced. So, over 100 patrol employees quit their job, including 64 commissioned officers. It was like 67 troopers, 6 sergeants, and 1 captain.
Right.
Yeah. So Washington State Patrol has about 2,000 personnel within between 8 districts. So losing 127 of them is not an insignificant loss.
No.
And it has been trying to hire a lot more people in the past a few months because of this. They've been trying to do a lot more recruitment, which is why they are. I've heard from other people that they are putting advertisements out on the internet to become a Washington State Trooper.
That makes sense.
This is something I've heard from people online when I've been doing all of this deep extensive research. So yeah, they are recruiting. So if you want to be a Washington State Patrol officer, don't actually. That's a bad idea. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you want to really fuck with people who live on a reservation, if that's your goal, it seems like the Washington State Highway Patrol is your dream career.
Or I have another option for you. You could also just get COVID and die. And
that is an option. That's an option too. Look,
something I think might be
freedom is what makes this nation great. So I think, a choice. Anyway, continue, Garrison.
I'm gonna send a picture inside our group chat first because we're gonna be talking about one specific evil dude next. I'm sending a picture in the group chat that I want you to look at first, just so you get a sense of who we're talking about.
Oh, based. Okay, I'm excited.
Yeah.
All right, hit me.
Oh no! Oh no! The bow tie really brings it all together.
Oh no! You said bow tie, which does not make me optimistic.
Yeah, not like
Robert, it's fine.
No.
Oh no!
What is wrong with it? Who?
Yeah.
Who puts a bow tie on a uniform like that?
Oh, guys, I found a better quality image.
Good God!
Here we go. Same image, better quality.
He looks like Tucker Carlson in the Starship Troopers universe when he gets drafted.
So this is the next guy we're talking about.
Somehow feels like a hate crime towards the Weasley family.
Yeah, it feels like a hate crime towards the guy based off Tucker Carlson in Starship Troopers.
Who happens to be a big fan of Ron Weasley's family.
Probably.
This is Sean Carr, a former Washington State Patrol sergeant, who resigned for reasons we will discuss.
Fun. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Anyway, so in 2015, an Associated Press investigation uncovered about 1,000 officers in the United States who lost their badges over a 6-year period for sex crimes or misconduct, such as this is a quote here, which I disagree with framing here, but this is a quote: propositioning citizens or having consensual but prohibited on-duty intercourse, which is a pretty bullshit way to frame that, because basically it's police raping people.
Yeah.
And police officers being accused of like using their power over people to rape them is extremely common.
Yeah, and it's often just like, yeah, well, the person said okay. And it's like, well, they said okay to a person with a gun and the legal power to murder anyone they want.
Or put
like,
them in jail. Yeah, like there's a lot of
consent.
stuff.
Yeah, I would argue you can't consent to sex with a police officer who's on duty and in uniform because it's,
or
again,
who,
they have the power to murder anybody they want.
Or who just arrest you. Like there's a lot of stuff. So like there was a study released a few years ago that analyzed data from like 550 arrest cases from the years of 2005 to 2007. So this is just 2 years. And of 400 officers employed by like 320 non-federal law enforcement agencies located throughout 43 states. And findings indicated that police sexual misconduct includes serious forms of sex-related crimes, and the victims of sex-related crimes by police are typically younger than 18 years old. So it happens a lot with minors. So there's a lot like more like a ridiculously common. Like if you Google this, which I honestly don't recommend, but you can find like dozens of stories coming out like basically every, like you'll find at least one news story every month of a kid getting raped by police. It happens pretty commonly. So over the past 10 years in the Washington State Patrol, they've investigated and confirmed 4 cases of what they call sex on duty, according to the agency, and this is including Sean Carr. Now, Sean Carr's case is particularly sensitive for the agency because he was married to the daughter of the Washington State Patrol chief. And Sean Carr was also himself a sergeant. So he was connected to like the big leagues at the Washington State Patrol. So Carr met a civilian woman who also works at Washington State Patrol, but as like, has like an office job. So they isn't a trooper. They met in 2012 and struck up an online friendship. And a few months later, they both of them told investigators that the relationship did turn sexual. Carr admitted to 6 sexual encounters over the next 5 years with the woman, 5 of which happened when he was on duty and on state property or driving a vehicle or while in uniform. But the woman recalled as many as 20, and all but one of them were when he was on duty. And so the woman said that most of their encounters were what she would describe as consensual. But she described 3 incidents where Carr did push the boundary, and she has described being raped by him multiple times.
Yeah.
So there was an incident. I think the first one happened at the beginning of 2017, with inside his patrol car in a church parking lot. The woman had recently started dating another man, and Carr wanted to know who it was. When she wouldn't say so, he grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises. And the woman said that Carr made her pick from 2 options: give up the name of the man or give Carr oral sex.
Oh God, cool, great guy.
Carr later told investigators that he said this in a quote joking context.
Oh, that's the I was thinking because that's almost exactly my tight 5 for my stand-up set.
I mean, some comedians for some reason do like making jokes like that, and not great usually. Not great to normalize that kind of thing. So the woman said that she did cede to his commands, and which she said were very much
he
not
had a gun and was a cop.
Not consent.
Sure.
Yeah, and she said it was very much not consensual. She told investigators that he raped me on the side of the road. And
right.
if it was anyone else besides Carr, she said she would have called 911. So the second time happened when Carr backed her into a corner of a highway, a way station, and forced her to have sex with him. She called it coerced. Carr said that consent was mutual. So,
sure.
Despite the sexual assaults, and assaults, grabbing someone's arm hard enough to leave a bruise, she said the woman said she kept in touch with Carr because she was going through a difficult time in her life and she needed somebody to talk to.
Yeah, sure. Shit's complicated.
This is
even
this
abuse
is also not
people who are abusive can also be emotionally supportive sometimes. Like that's one of the things about abuse that's such a real motherfucker. It's not simple. Yeah.
So Carr may not have gotten in trouble had the woman not confided in another patrol employee after she left her job. Then the other patrol employee mentioned the situation to someone higher up, triggering an investigation. And then in 2019, the woman formally reported Carr to like the patrol office of professional standards. So records show that the patrol pretty quickly confiscated Carr's badge and gun and placed him on home assignment, where he remained until he resigned voluntarily. The patrol gave the case to the sheriff's office to investigate because of the criminal nature of the allegations. So Carr's personal file includes other on-job violations, including using a taser on a drunk driving suspect who was handcuffed.
Cool.
And records show that in February of 2013, Carr was accused of frequenting a coffee stand and making unwanted advances on an employee by waiting near her car until her shift ended and making derogatory comments about her boyfriend. So he was also stalking this barista, is what it sounds like.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is what that sounds
That's
like.
pretty terrifying.
So Carr, after the woman told investigators that she was raped after 2019, the county sheriff's recommended charges be filed, but she wasn't willing to. She wasn't willing to testify. She did not want to. She did not want to do that. But she did tell prosecutors that she did have one wish, that Carr, again, the son-in-law of the state patrol chief, be not allowed to police again.
Yeah, that's a pretty reasonable request.
Carr obviously denied all the accusations of non-consensual sex and assault, but it did admit to a consensual sexual relationship on duty, as well as other patrol regulation violations. He resigned in July of 2020 before the patrol could decide whether or not to fire him. And then the state went about trying to strip him of his law enforcement certification, a requirement to carry a gun and badge and be hired as law enforcement in Washington. Getting decertified for misconduct by the Criminal Justice Training Center in Washington is very hard. Very few people have actually been decertified.
Yeah.
And to be certified, a panel must be convinced that on-duty behavior rose to the level of official misconduct and constituted a crime committed under the color of authority as a peace officer. That's
under the
quote.
Color of authority is an interesting way to phrase that.
So Carr's attorneys argued that the state failed to meet this high bar, and there was, quote, no legal basis to decertify Carr. Meanwhile, the CJTC, the Criminal Justice Training Center, alleged his behavior did constitute official misconduct and failure of duty, but they didn't actually include the sexual assault allegations. Instead, it contended that he used state resources for his own benefit or neglected to do his duties when he was engaged in sexual activity on duty. So they didn't actually include sexual assault or anything in this. They just said you were basically because you were having sexual activity on duty, you weren't doing your job, and that's the reason that we want to decertify you. So the state of Washington has about 11,000 certified officers at any given time, and since 2003, they've decertified 230, and at least 4 of them for on-duty sex, and one of those cases was overturned on appeal. But in 2021, around mid-May, the CJTC, in its final order, said that Carr's constituted crimes of failure of duty and official misconduct by, among other things, quote, intentionally choosing to pursue his own sexual gratification rather than using his on-duty time to perform his lawful responsibilities as a peace officer. So he did get decertified, but again, not actually discussing the actual assaults and rapes. So the Sheriff County Prosecutor's Office declined to pursue charges on the case last year when the woman was unwilling to testify. But the deputy prosecuting attorney did say that she believed they just happened. She believes this stuff happened, but because of the lack of evidence due to time passing and the woman not wanting to testify, it's hard to prove guilt in court. So they're not going to pursue these charges at the moment.
Yeah, that scans.
So that is Sean Carr. So he's not allowed to police as of May of 2021. That is a cursory glance at stuff in the Washington State Patrol. Oh, I guess one other thing I found out today is that so Washington State Patrol has a psychologist for recruiting. So for if you want to join the patrol, you have to go through a psychological screening.
Sure, that makes sense.
And he just resigned because he was probably going to get fired. This was after Seattle Times and Public Radio Northwest News Network published a piece showing that since 2017, the psychological screenings rejected. Where is it? Rejected 20% of white candidates over the past 4 years. But the psychologists that they hired rejected 33% of black candidates, 35% of Hispanic candidates, and 41% of Asian candidates. So again, I'm not pro people being police in general, but there is a clear disparity on who they are wanting to become police. Who are they? They're letting in a lot more white candidates than they are letting in candidates of color. So this psychologist screener is no longer on the job as of a few days ago. So just another level of stuff because they want there to be more white officers than anything else. So that is the Washington State Patrol. I guess the one other thing I want to do is I'm gonna again send in the group chat their current logo, logo. Current.
Oh, you're smirking. You're smirking. Oh,
I hate it when you do this.
I'm afraid.
I don't know, Sophie. Maybe it'll be fine.
I mean, it's actually
fine.
It's kind of fun.
That's their logo?
That is their current logo.
Did they design it in paint?
Yes. They probably did design it in MS Paint.
Oh, man. Yeah, that looks like it belongs on an Angel Fire website. Garrison, do you know what Angel Fire was?
I do not.
Oh, my God. You fucking teenagers. That looks like it belongs in an Angel Fire. I will let all of the other people who feel very old right now know that it looks like something you'd see in an Angel Fire website, shittily animated, blinking across the screen.
Yeah, no, it looks like something from a 1990s website.
All right. Well, now I'm both angry about the police and I feel 1,000 years old, so this is good.
Man, Garrison, you did it.
What a good feeling.
You did it.
That wraps it up for today. And hey, again, I have heard that they are recruiting and they should have a new psychological screener soon. So
great.
There we go.
I'm imagining the primary psychological screening is you're white, right?
That is what it used to be.
I mean, I'm imagining that's what it's going to be still, but maybe not,
probably.
Garrison. Maybe not.
Who knows?
All right. Well, this has been a great time. I'm sure everybody's feeling good.
Feel great.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Get out of my house.
Hi, this is Jo Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom loving and different perspectives. And I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Eckerd, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Police search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
In 2023, a story gripped the UK, evoking horror and disbelief.
The nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history.
Everyone thought they knew how it ended. A verdict, a villain, a nurse named Lucy Letby.
Lucy Letby has been found guilty.
But what if we didn't get the whole story?
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we follow the evidence and hear from the people that lived it to ask what really happened when the world decided who Lucy Letby was.
No voicing of any skepticism or doubt.
It'll cause so much harm at every single level of the British establishment of this is wrong.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the Chudcast. This is a crypto podcast where we talk about the best NFT investments and how you can get rich too, bro, if you just accept the wave of the future and decentralize your finance and invest in a bank that can take all of your money overnight and disappear because it was really just being run by a guy in Macedonia, and it was just a rug pull the entire time, and you lose your life savings and you have no recourse, and that's the fucking future of investments, bro.
Hey, bro, you're fired.
Yeah, that's fair. So this is It Could Happen Here, podcast about how things are bad, sometimes a podcast about how to make them less bad. Today, we're talking about the former, how things are bad, and we're talking about financialization, and specifically the financialization of, like, human beings in the endeavor to create art. And so, more
art
or less,
is a broad term.
I mean, I said the endeavor to.
Okay.
I'm sure they all want to be creating art. Well, this won't make any sense to people yet, so I'm gonna give a brief overview. There's an article in The Atlantic that dropped on November 29th called "What Happens When You're the Investment." It's by Rex Woodbury, who I hate. So as a note. Let me just get the nut of the article is, and there have been a couple of other articles on this guy. His name is Alex Masmej, and he is a French kid, I think, who decided to tokenize himself. And what that means is, so like, you've got the Ethereum blockchain, right? He's carving up aspects of his like potential future earnings, and he's putting those on the Ethereum blockchain as like tokens that people can buy. And the idea is that this kid wanted to like start a business and be an entrepreneur, but he didn't have any money. So using like on the Ether blockchain, he turned himself into tokens, basically, like his potential future earnings and his time. And basically people are able to buy up coins effectively. I mean, not coins, but tokens.
Shares of the tokens.
Yeah. $Alex is like the name of the token, which are basically shares. He's turned himself essentially into a publicly traded company, kind of. And holders of his coins are like, he's splitting up 15% of his income for the next 3 years, basically, among people who like hold his coins. And he raised like 20 grand this way. And it's not just his future earnings that are being kind of tokenized. You can also use tokens to like buy retweets from him or one-on-one conversations or and here's a line I love, an introduction to someone in his network. And it's the overall idea, because you can find some other good articles. Good is an interesting word to use. You can find other interesting, fascinating articles about this idea, which is like human beings tokenizing their future earning potential in order to raise money. And it's the way this is usually sold is a good thing. In fact, I should probably just read a quote from this Atlantic article to give you an idea of how Massmej is, or of how the author of the article, Rex Woodbury, is trying to sell this shit. We all have the slightly annoying friend who insists that she knew about so-and-so before they were even famous. When it comes to Taylor Swift, I'm that friend, and I'm more than slightly annoying about it. I was a Taylor fan in her pre-Fearless full-on country days, years before Conway interrupted her on stage at the VMAs. But in our current construct of fandom, I'm treated no differently than a fan who discovered Swift on SNL a few weeks back. This would be different, though, if Taylor had done what Massmej did and turned herself into an investment. She could have issued a social token, whereas non-fungible tokens, or NFTs, are so called because of the uniqueness of a digital asset. Social tokens are fungible. In other words, each Alex token is interchangeable with every other Alex token, just like a dollar bill can be traded for any other dollar bill. Say Taylor had issued her own token. Let's call it $Swift, and say she had sold $Swift to her biggest fans. Yeah, say I was one such fan. Over time, as Taylor's popularity grew, the value of the Swift token would have appreciated. As an early believer, I would have shared in the financial upside of her growing fame. The Swift token I bought for $100 in 2007 might be worth $100,000 today. The Taylor Swift mini economy would serve both the singer and early fans like me. As an artist, Taylor could have funded her work by selling $ or Swift tokens. She might not have needed to sell ownership of her masters, and she might not have been forced to re-record her albums to take back control over her art. Taylor's fans, for their part, would have been rewarded for a decade of patronage. We're all evangelists for our favorite artists, yet we capture little of the value that we help create. And that there's a lot that, like, I find unsettling there. One of them is the idea that, like, yeah, the fact that I was a fan of someone earlier means I should get some sort of reward for it. Like, I should be treated differently because I liked it earlier, which you might recognize, like, the thing that everybody has been shitting on for, like, of fandoms for years now. Like, it's been a huge thing where, like, yeah, you're being an asshole if you're talking about, like, if you think you have some additional ownership of Star Wars because you watched it 10 years before the fans today, and so you like different stuff in it. Like, we all recognize that as, like, toxic. But the whole argument of this article is that, like, no, this is how the entire future of creativity should work, which I find unsettling.
And it also ties into, like, a really concerning development in parasocial relationships of, like, being able to like invest in someone to buy a conversation with them in, like, this really weird way. And the fact that young artists are going to be pressured into this kind of thing is really scary.
Yeah, because there's, like, one of the things Massmej did as, like, as an experiment was, like, allow people who had bought his tokens to make life decisions for him, like tell him when to wake up in the morning and whether or not to eat red meat and stuff like that. And he stated that, like, well, none of this is binding, right? Like, I might do what they say, but, like, I'm not going to do anything crazy or whatever. But also, this is, like, the first iteration of this, and I. Like, this Atlantic article, which I think is unhinged for reasons we'll get into, but it's purely talking about, like, look at this incredibly successful person. Imagine if they'd gotten to be incredibly successful using this method instead, and it might have, like, spared them this thing. But what I keep thinking about is, like, okay, well, the vast majority of people, like, there's no reason to invest in them.
Like, yeah, maybe if you come out with a great song or a great video, like, yeah, you could get investments, and I'm sure that could work out. I'm sure, like, Taylor Swift is a successful enough person. I'm sure she could have found a way to succeed under that system, too. But what I think will be much more common, because there's no real reason to anticipate that the average person will have an earnings potential if you give them 20 grand that's greater than 20 grand. The most likely thing is that, like, people just buy shares in poor people to make them do fucked up shit.
Yeah, it's
right?
going to be used.
How would you not? How would that not be where it goes?
No,
right?
Yeah, that's the only way that this is going to get like used on a large scale.
Mm-hmm.
Is these young people just selling themselves?
People
in
are going
weird way.
People are going to use the Ether blockchain to like crowdfund and cast a new Jackass, basically. Like it's not going to be like 1,000 Taylor Swifts all tokenizing themselves. It's going to be like millions of people in the global south issuing tokens to like vote on whether they roll down the hill in a barrel or in like a fucking porta potty. Like it's a nightmare to me to contemplate people actually adopting this.
You know, there's a lot of really like the thing I think is the most incredible part about this is that like, okay, so like it basically doesn't matter what like economic theory you use to look at it. It's like every single one of them tells you something just like absolutely fucked about it. And like, you know, because I mean, there's some extent to which I look at this and it's like, this isn't that much different than the fact, you know, it's like, okay, so you're paying someone to do whatever you want, but like, okay, like that's not that much different than just a job, right? Like it's not inherently that much different than the fact that everyone is forced to just do wage labor. But also, like, there's one of the most interesting things to me that I thought about this when I was was reading this was, so do you guys know what capitalization is?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is just capitalizing a person, right? Like, this is what capitalization is. It's literally
taking a person public, effectively,
and putting turning them into like a tradable share. That's like an investment. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that, like, a Forbes article I found pointed out is, like, this is another kind of unregulated securities trading.
Yeah. But what's interesting to me about it is that, like, okay, so, you know, this is also already how, accounting-wise, every corporation sees a person, right? Like, every person in the asset book is, you know, you know, like, a wage is just capitalization, right? It's like, how much will you pay now for this much money later? But it's like, people are doing it to themselves now?
Yeah.
Which is, like, this...
Yeah, you could argue that like elements of this are how like banks treat you when you get a mortgage, right? Like, but also that's much more rigorous and limited. Like the limit is that like,
it has like regulations and it has rules for how those things work. It's not some like 12-year-old getting like going onto Coinbase and buying part of you as a joke with like his dad's money, right? Like,
because it's like because what if it's like, there's no law against a 17-year-old, I guess maybe their parents may need to consent, but there's no law against a 17-year-old getting a facial tattoo of like the doors of a concentration camp on their face. But what if some kid tokenizes himself for 40 grand so he can drop an EP, and that's what like a bunch of 4chaners who buy up his shares want him to do? And maybe the fucking kid does that because he knows it's going to get him, because his brain's not done, and he knows it's going to get him a bunch of fucking social media clout. And like, there's a lot of, and there's no way to regulate that. Like, it's just an inherently toxic proposition that I don't think the government would, I don't know what side of this the government would even step in on. Like, what is the regulation of people deciding I'm letting random strangers who pay me money vote on what I do with my life?
The other thing it reminds me of a lot is like the micro lending stuff from the 90s. Where it was like, oh, we'll like empower these people by we'll go in and we're going to give them like a small amount of money and they have to pay it back. And it was like, you know, and all of the same stuff that you were reading, like all the arguments about why this is a good thing are exactly the same as the microlending ones. And that stuff, you know, there were two ways it turned out. One was basically you get the scenario where both sides are scamming each other.
Yeah.
Where, you know, all the people who are getting these microloans they're just taking the money and walking, right? Like that's, you know, their thing is, oh, this is, I can just get money like this and I can just keep not paying it back. And so I'm scamming them. But then on the other side, you have these people who are like, oh, cool, I can give this person this loan and turn him into a debt peon.
Yeah.
And the really depressing side about it is, so the people who couldn't get away, like, I mean, we're literally reduced to debt peons, and, you know, I mean, there's a huge wave of suicides in, like, India is probably the most famous example. Is a wave of suicides, people drinking pesticide because they couldn't pay off these loans. And so, the thing that's different about this is that, like, I mean, A, you're doing it to yourself, but then B, again, there's no regulation, but that also means there isn't any way to force someone to do what you say you're going to do yet.
It's unclear how it's going to be enforced, and the other thing that's unclear is, like, what does losses look like? Like, what happens when someone cannot make back on like an investment, but if the investment is a person, how does that work? And if someone's like contractually obligated to give a certain share of their income, what happens when there's not enough income for that? Like you know, so those types of things.
Yeah, I mean, there's no answer to that, and there's nobody, like, the money that's going to be whatever made in this is going to be made before anyone steps in to try to answer that, if anyone ever does. Like, it's gonna be the next, because I think we're heading for a crash with NFTs. Like, there was just an article today about how, 97% of NFT trading is done by like 10% of people, which further back, because the allegations of NFTs is that most of what's happening isn't people actually buying them, it's people, like, the same person using multiple wallets, basically trying to jack up the perceived value by throwing a bunch of other internet money that they already have. So it's these whales who have, like, a bunch of crypto gaming the system. And we've seen some of it. And the biggest NFT sale ever was like $500 million, and it was a guy selling it to himself and then transferring it back into another wallet to try to make it look like it was worth $500 million, even though no one had actually really paid that for it. So I think, you know, that and kind of what we've seen with the regulations the government's announced for NFTs, I think that's a problem for them in the near future. And I wouldn't be surprised to see this take off next, especially given, like, the creator economy that we're seeing on, like, the kind of that
TikTok specifically.
Yeah, TikTok. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a rash of big TikTok stars tokenizing themselves, and like, I'm not even sure. I'm sure it would be a mix of the person making the tokens being the one doing the scam, and the person receiving or the people buying the tokens being the one doing. Like, I'm sure it would be a mix of different kinds of exploitation, but it's not going to be good.
I mean, and just like NFTs, it's going to make, like, I don't know, 50 people super rich when they first start trying it, right? Like, that is like, when this happens, like, when a TikTok star with 25 million followers, when they do this, they will make boatloads of money. It's just unclear what happens after that. Yeah.
Well, flee to Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the smart thing.
That would be the smart thing to do.
Yeah.
In this Forbes article I found, which is 1,000 times better than the Atlantic article, like, even though it's written by someone I think who's also into crypto, it asks some of these questions we've been talking about, and it cites David Hoffman, who's the COO of a tokenized real estate platform, on what he sees as some of the problems, like what he, as a guy who supports aspects of this kind of thing, sees as the problems with this. And it's one sec. Hoffman returning to his core problem with the personal token model. Hoffman reemphasized that the assurances and utility that come with some of these tokens don't exist for with certain kinds of tokens don't exist for, like, these personal tokens. How risky this investment is completely defined by the individual. In his disclaimer, he's talking about one of the guys who's tokened himself, this guy named Kerman. In his disclaimer, he says, this is a highly risky investment and that you could lose all your money, which is a terrible thing to say because with personal tokens, the issuer is in complete control over exactly how risky the investment actually is. It's largely up to them whether there are risks or not, which is like a kind of illegal securities trading that I don't think anyone's ever done. Like, it's this fascinating new con where you're literally you're doing securities trading, but instead of it being over a company, it's just you, and technically there's no consequences if you just take the money and run. Like, I don't know what kind of contract. Like, you couldn't have a contract that says, like, you could say that you're obligated to pay out your future earnings, but you couldn't have to work. Like, that's not enforceable. You can't like contractually obligate someone to like work. Like, you're allowed to quit a job. I mean, I guess you could put penalties in it, but I like none of the current ones have any kind
I mean,
of
or they
in it.
could
Like,
go
I'm
to
sure
jail
that'll
for
evolve.
the other option is that they could go to jail for fraud if they try to not follow through on the investment. If you say like, yeah, I invested in you and you said that you would do these things, you didn't do them, now you can go to prison. That is
But
the other
yeah.
thing.
And I think that'll at some point, like, there will be scams and some of that will come in, but like none of these current ones, none of them are saying, here's my specific, I'm going to make this specific. It's not like if you like with a Patreon, right? You're paying a little bit at a time on an ongoing basis for a very clear product generally.
Yeah.
And this is, so far, these aren't that. They're just like, I'm going to try to do something that makes money. And if it does, you get a cut of it. And it's so much like there's nothing that's stopping MassMedge from saying like, hey, my attempt didn't work. So we're done. No money for anybody like that. And you're not, there's no accounting requirements. There's a bunch of ways in which it's fucked up from a financial side.
Except it's not his, it's not, you're not investing in his business, you're investing in him. So even if he takes another job, they're still, it seems to be contractually obligated to still get that 15% of his income.
Yes, and I think that's the area in which I think it would be abusive for the person being tokenized, because most people aren't gonna, like, most people don't make that much money. So someone manages to like raise $5 or $10 grand and then just winds up for years giving a cut of their income that winds up being more than they got initially to a bunch of, like, it's almost like a payday loan that you've done on the blockchain.
Okay, so this is the thing I was thinking about, because there's I don't know if I've talked about this on the show, but there's a thing in China where they've been kind of cracking down on it now for starting in like 2019, like literally every single app like had a payday loan thing in it. So like your flashlight app would offer you a payday loan, and it was basically it was originally tied in with like people who buy it was originally tied in with the services that let you order, like their version of Amazon, for example, would like, oh, hey, we'll give you a loan so you can buy this, you can order fried chicken. And I was always wondering when this would come to the US, and I think it might never. Hopefully it never does, and I think it might not, just because of how like powerful our payday loan industry is. But it's like we've now invented it. It seems like it's gonna happen, but like dumber. Like our version of it is like this thing, which is just, it's what if payday loans but on the blockchain? Except, I guess this is the other thing, that we've been getting at is that the difference between this being a payday loan and this being you scammed a bunch of people is what the enforcement mechanism looks like. And this comes back to some other things I think are interesting about this. One is that, so the whole NFT grift, right, is based on convincing people that there's value in ownership, right? That like ownership itself inherently has value.
Yeah.
And but this is not that. This is going back to, no, your value is built on labor, right?
Well,
yeah. It's like sort
labor and like personhood, like you as a personal brand is is the thing that they're trying to get at.
But the thing that's missing here though is that in order for in order for like labor to produce value, right, in this way, there has to be a way for you to force them to pay you. Like you need coercion for it. And if there's no coercion, then you just take a bunch of money and leave. And that I think is like this is going to be the battle over, like, if this becomes a thing, it's going to be, the people who buy these things are going to wind up like trying to, I think they're going to be the ones who try to push a regulation, because they're going to they're going to go in, they're going to be, I want to get my money back, and that could end really, really, really badly, right?
Yeah.
Like if
it probably will. I don't know how popular I think this will be, because I think that
I hope it dies.
This is maybe if there'd never been like Patreon or something, but the actual use case of this seems to already be well served by the existing capitalist infrastructure. Like, I think more people want to back a creator's Patreon than they want to like own pieces of a person's time and earning potential. Like that seems like a more niche and weird desire to people than just like, oh yeah, these guys make a video I like every week, so I'll throw them $3.
Well, I think the difference though is that Patreon money gets you money from normal people. This gets you money from like tech bros, and that's always what NFTs are. Yeah, it's a grift designed to get money from those people.
I want to dive back into this Atlantic article because it's so bad in such a comprehensive way that I think it deserves analysis. That's what put a pin in what you said, but I want to start with like how the person writing this Rex motherfucker, like his concept of the history of the internet, because it's completely wrong. Quote, "We're on the precipice of the third era of the web. The web's first era was about information flowing freely. Think Google giving you access to the world's knowledge. Most of us were passive consumers in this era. The second era was the social web, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. People began to create their own content, and that content became the lifeblood of the big platforms. We became active participants, but the platforms devoured all the profits. The promise of the internet was to erase the gatekeepers. Instead of waiting for a record label to sign you, you could share your music on Spotify. Instead of asking a publication to share your words, you could tweet. Instead of being tapped by a studio exec, you could become a YouTuber. But what happened is that these platforms became the new gatekeepers. The third era of the web is about righting the ship. Social capital becomes economic capital. Value no longer accumulates to brokers and intermediaries." That's... number one, completely wrong. For one thing, the first era of the internet, I would say, was about the idea that information should flow freely, and Google came in like a decade or more into that period. I had been on the internet 5 years before Google hopped into that shit, and Google was actually the start of the end of that period. And it's the idea that like the social web was people creating their own content. Most of the social web's initial capital and like all of its initial money came from taking content that people were being paid to make on legacy platforms that had existed before social media, taking that content, putting it on social media, and then monetizing that without paying money back to the people who had made the content. The money in social media did not initially come from people making their own content in the way that they mean it. Like, yeah, you at College Humor or whatever were making your own content and sharing it on social media, but you'd been doing that before social media. Social media just actually made it less profitable eventually. Like, the way he summarizes this is so wrong, because what the social web actually did, and the other thing I'd argue is that the first era of the internet, the like early days when things are happening on like forums and weird little Angel Fire websites and like even MySpace, which I think is MySpace kind of straddles the first and second eras. That was fundamentally much more an era of people creating their own content, because the lifeblood of social media today isn't people really making their own content. It's people reacting to content that other people made. And again, it just shows the fact that he's summarizing it this way in a way that I think is so wrong and inaccurate to how things actually developed is characteristic of his attitude towards this stuff, where he's kind of seeing the only real meaningful evolutions in the internet through the corporations that monetized it, which is just telling of like how this guy actually sees the way the internet has developed. And you will not be surprised to know this motherfucker is an investor at Index Ventures. Like he's a guy whose business is capitalizing things. And so that's the only way he sees the development of the internet, even though that's not the accurate way of looking at how the internet evolved.
And I think that there's one more really important thing that he leaves out here, which is that, because, like we're talking, this is the third age of the internet. Like, no, the third age of the internet started like, I don't know, the early mid 2010s when.
Yeah, I would say when Gamergate hit is when I would. Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a little off either way.
It depends what you mean by age.
So one of my friends works in advertising, and he was talking about this where, we can talk about like Gamergate and the sort of fascist mobs, but there was something else happening back end, which was the Internet of Things stuff. And the Internet of Things stuff, like, it's kind of a, I don't know, like I think we mostly think about it as like it's kind of a joke, or it's like it just sucks. But really what it was that was the period in which people figured out that the actual money to be made on the internet was from selling people's personal information.
Yeah.
And the Internet of Things, like, just dramatic, like, just indescribably increased the amount of data that you could extract from people.
Yeah.
And that was the actual change of that's the 30 of the internet. And that era of the internet will last basically forever until we destroy it, which is that, the commodity is just all of the information about who you are, where you go, like what you buy, who you talk to, that just being sold off to advertisers is, the thing that he's very, very carefully not talking about, and instead focusing on, it was users creating content. And it's like, no, the internet's like just they sold spying on the entire world.
Yeah, and I think there's two good ways to divide the internet into ages, and the ages would be slightly different each way. One is kind of how you're doing it, is the way in which it was monetized, right? That's one way to, and then if that's the case, it's going to start with it was not at all. It was an entirely public project, and everybody on it was on it through like a university, and like people did not pay to access it. Other than that, you had to be at an institution or a university, and then like. We get to the kind of the era before the .com boom and of the .com boom, and then like the early pre-social internet stuff like Something Awful and like having stumbled upon and whatnot, and like those sending traffic to sites like where I used to work, Cracked, and then kind of the social media, which is the start of, as you said, like the data being monetized, like individuals' data being the thing, either that's being directly monetized or it's being used to deliver like targeted ads to you. And then there's like, if you think about it in terms of content, it starts like for the first era wouldn't even involve Google, because it would be like the start of Usenet up to Eternal September in 1993, and then on from there. But either way, this guy doesn't everything he says about the history of the internet is dumb.
It's just a very simplified version, and you don't actually look at like the interlocking systems. Because I don't know why he describes it this way, because it is like it's accurate if you squint and don't think about it.
Yeah.
But it's weird because like this article's like it's for tech bros, so I don't know why he describes it this way, because I feel like he could describe it a lot more accurately if he wanted to.
Well, it's something I'm going to get into. I'm going to say this probably like twice this episode. I'm going to get into in the neoliberalism episodes that I'm writing. But one of the key features of neoliberalism is that they lie. Is that the neoliberals have two versions of what they believe. They have the version that they tell everyone else, which is completely a lie and is not what they believe at all. And then they have the version that they tell to each other, which is what they actually believe. And they contradict each other completely. They mostly believe everything that they say in public is just a complete lie. And I think that's what he's doing here, which is that that history of the internet is the one you sell to public consumption.
Yes.
Because that's the lie you tell people to take money from them. And then he has a thing that he believes, but which he will not ever tell you, because if he told you what like he actually wanted to do, you would run screaming from the room.
And
so
I think
this is the
you
myth building
can
project.
read between what he wants you to believe. I think is made very clear by how he divides, by the fact that when he starts like dividing up the ages of the internet, he says the first one is the time in which people wanted information to be free. And what he's kind of saying by doing that is saying like that was an infant stage of the internet. And obviously the natural evolution of the internet is for every single thing on it to become monetized. And because I also believe the internet should be every aspect of our lives, like this is a megaverse guy or a metaverse guy, like I think the internet should be involved in every aspect of life. That means every aspect of life should be financialized. And that's extremely radical, but it does not sound that way when you describe it that way. Yep. People's heads go over it, but like what he's saying is deeply radical. And I think also like, again, you want to talk about like and not just the early age, like, cause the first people who kind of built the backbone of the internet were mostly like very radically capitalizing on it. Like there was this idea that like it absolutely should be as free as possible. Like Steve Wozniak, the guy who functionally invented the personal computer, had a background like as a phone phreaker, like literally robbing phone companies to get like free phone calls and stuff. Like these, like most of the early internet pioneers were like some kind of criminal. And the early ages of like internet content being monetized mostly started with people doing shit for free. Like that was how the people who made money on it, that's how all of my bosses, and that's how fucking I got started, was like you would just start making shit and you would put it out for free. And eventually like that would get enough traffic that you'd draw ads to you and whatnot, and you'd make money. But it was always like all of the content that made the internet, and all of the content creators who are huge now mostly started doing so, like even it was just like throwing up videos on YouTube, right? Or like going on, and that's less the case with the Zoomers now, because a lot of them got started on things like Twitch, where the idea is to from the beginning be trying to monetize yourself, and while you're like building a brand, you're constantly monetized. But that's a really recent change, and I find it kind of unsettling, because that was, I don't know, it's a mix, because I'm certainly not of the mind that like if someone is asking you to do work, you should be getting paid for it. But if you are trying to like build a life as a creator, the best way to do that creatively is to just make the things that you think are cool, and then make, like, if other people like it, you make money. Like, better things get made than that. Way. Like that is the way the best art gets made.
I think there's a few things going on here. Because like the way I think actually the reason why he frames it this way is because he's trying to get back to his idea of freedom, right? He describes like the golden age of the internet being information flowing freely. He thinks that the blockchain is the new version of that, so that's why he's framing it in this way. The second thing is in terms of like artists and creators. If you think about like when the early age of what he calls like of what we kind of all been referring to as like the second era, when era of like when social media and like content creation like sites are a thing. Let's like just use YouTube as an example. Because there was a low saturation in content, it was easier for someone to rise up and gain a platform. Let's say someone like Bo Burnham, right, who started as just a kid and now is like a very popular comedian.
Yeah.
But then YouTube, instead of backing creators like that, which they did a little bit, but they did not as much, they instead started like the thing that happened was like YouTube really incentivizing sharing like late night content and sharing like TV, like clips of TV shows, and like using legacy media on their platform. And that's the things they really backed. That's the things they really pushed into your feed. It's like Tonight Show clips. So a lot of those original content creators kind of got left behind, and now are now like just are running on their own personal brands. Some of them use Patreon, for example. But it's impossible to do this now because there's an oversaturation of content. The only thing that's done this recently is TikTok, because it was a brand new platform. There was again a new opportunity for a lot of kids to gain a lot of audiences really quickly.
I mean, based on what you're saying, I think that like TikTok is the closest to how cool shit happened on the internet before everything got
Agreed.
Because it is like you're not starting from like everyone starts, I guess, knowing you could make money, but that was the same way you start because you're doing a thing, and if that thing takes off, then there's ways to monetize, and like that. Yeah, I think that's probably part of why it's so popular.
Generally, growth on TikTok is pretty organic. It's not boosted by big brands the same way stuff like YouTube is. Now, it's probably going to be edging in that direction, but it's not there yet. So. And his argument in this is to get back to just being like a small content creator, getting your stuff seen. His solution to this problem of like YouTube and stuff backing like these large like late night shows and backing like these large like corporately funded things, his solution is that if you're a small content creator, you should sell yourself as an asset to other people on the internet, right? So because like his whole idea is that he wants to get rid of the gatekeepers of the internet and go back to how the internet was, but his solution for doing that is just by selling you as a person brand to other people on the internet who are like tech bro investors. So that's why it's framed this specific way. So I think when we're all like talking about like why does he describe it this way, what's all this weird stuff going on, it's because that's how he's rationalized it in his brain, is for how what he thinks being a free artist is, and he thinks this is going to be the new method to get there.
There's another important sort of macro thing to think about this year, which is that the underlying basis of all of this, right, is the assumption that everyone is an entrepreneur. Is that, like everyone is doing all of their stuff at all times because they want, in order to be a business owner. And this has been like, this has been the great ideological victory of the right in the last 50 years, is that they convinced everyone that like every single person is, like it's not even temporary embarrassed millionaire syndrome. It's like even people who like are working jobs, right? Like working wage labor jobs, think of themselves as, content creators, and a content creator, is a small business owner. And this has an immensely coercive too, but corrosive effect on, anyone working together to do something because, you know, oh, you're not a worker. You're just like, you're a content creator. You're, you know, you're a small business owner. You're like, you know, what, and that's, you know, this is a very long running thing that a bunch of incredibly powerful people have been trying to do really since, like, I mean, arguably like the 30s, but the complete success of that, and the way that, you know, they're selling exactly the same thing that they were selling in like the 80s, but now it's this, like, you know, you're trying to get people to do it to themselves, and also they throw all of this like sort of nonsense tech jargon at you to get you to sort of like stop looking at the fact that this is just sort of, you know, this is just the new, even worse version of everyone being a worker who thinks that they're, like, you know, also going to be a small business owner someday.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have anything else really to say about it other than this, but, like, I mean, this was a good amount to say. I just think this is so, I think it's such an example of kind of the way in which the worst people in the world are trying to steer the internet. And by steering the internet, steer the soul of, like, the human race. Like, this is a vision of the future this guy's sharing. And this article that isn't positioning itself as radical, but includes some, like, deeply radical ideas about how the world should go. And by the way, I should also note that he's also just, like, blatantly wrong every time he brings up a number. Like, he points out in this article that 46 million Americans own cryptocurrency. The real number is more likely about 21 million, kind of at most, like, by every credible. I have no idea where he's getting 46 million Americans own cryptocurrency. And again, the stat just came out, and that's part of his argument, is that, like, obviously people love the blockchain and these tokens, and, like, this is inevitably going to get more and more popular. And when, again, the reality is that every real thing that's happening on the blockchain is pretty much versions of a security scam that the government has just announced they're going to finally start regulating. But yeah, I want to. So the study that just came out today was that analysis of 6.1 million trades of, like, 4.7 million NFTs. It shows that the top 10% of traders were responsible for 97% of trading, which again is more evidence that all that's happening is people boosting prices. Also, the vast majority, like more than 90% of NFT sales are for less than $200. Some of them are for just pennies. Like, what the stuff that you're hearing about is all ridiculous outliers, and it's outliers specifically because people are pumping stuff up in order to try to con someone. And that's the whole basis of this guy's, the structural argument, the reason that he's attempting to argue that, like, there's actually desire here and that this is in fact the future of the internet, is based entirely upon, like, numbers that are either bad or he's deliberately lying about the numbers, because there is no credible evidence I've ever heard that 46 million Americans currently own cryptocurrency or even have ever owned cryptocurrency.
Yeah, and I think the other kind of nail in the coffin for this idea, and why I don't think it's going to catch on the same way these guys think it does, and this is something he acknowledges in the article, is, like, not a lot of people know how the stock exchange works. Like, very, like, he says, I think it's like, I don't know, like, I forget what number he says, but he says, like, not tons of people actually use or know what the stock exchange is, and the reason why Patreon was so successful and why it's so useful for content creators is because it's a very intuitive system. It's very clear how it works. It's clear what you're doing. There's no really questions about where your money's going or what's happening. I don't think this whole personal investment thing is ever going to actually go off, because people don't understand what the blockchain is, and it's too much work to explain it to them. And just because of how much work it is to wrap your mind around, like, so where is my money going? What do I have to set up? How does that work? That's way too much of a headache, because in order for this to actually work, you need this to break out of the tech bro bubble, or else this is just going to be this small tech bro thing of people handing over the same $100 to all their friends in a circle, which is what it is currently. And in order to break out of that circle, they need to get, you know, your grandmother to learn what crypto is and how blockchains work. And that's not going to happen. So I think that is the one other nail in the coffin for this type of idea, is, like, Patreon is easy. Patreon makes sense. This thing, it is not nearly as intuitive for supporting a YouTuber you like.
Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. I actually found evidence on where that 46 million Americans number comes from. Yeah, so basically, number one, I found, like, a fucking crypto news source pointing out that, like, when people started tweeting that 46 million Americans, it's based on a study, which we'll talk about in a second, but like when people started tweeting about this, like the immediate response in the Bitcoin subreddit was like, well, that's not fucking possible. Like one of the people in the Bitcoin subreddit said, sounds very high. I don't know a single person who owns it. And this says 1 in 6 or 7 people own it. Yeah, and it comes from a study conducted in January by the New York Digital Investment Group, surveying 1,000 participants with incomes over $50,000. So that seems valid.
Wait, they just said it's over 50. This methodology.
You'll get a few, like Pew released a study suggesting that like 16% of Americans have used cryptocurrency at some point. And like all of what's coming out is kind of sketchy. All of the data, there's like reasons to be kind of unsettled about it. But also like one of the things the Pew study showed is that the vast majority of Americans have heard of cryptocurrency, and most haven't used it. Like the vast majority have not chosen to get involved, like however accurate you think this is. Like there's another article coming out that says that came out in, I guess, May of this year that's based on a Gemini study, which is Gemini is a crypto exchange, that over 50 million Americans are likely to buy crypto in the next year, which doesn't seem to have happened. I just don't see. There's all sorts of like weird little studies commissioned by weird little groups, but it really doesn't. It seems like it's again kind of part of the grift. Like I'm not seeing a lot of rigor in any of this. Anyway, whatever. We've talked enough about this shit. I think we all, as soon as we read the article, were so like appalled by it that we should probably talk about this for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Jo Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom-loving and different perspectives, and I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart-side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Echard, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first Bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Police search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to The A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
China's Ministry of State Security is one of the most mysterious and powerful spy agencies in the world. But in 2017, the FBI got inside.
This is Special Agent Regal, Special Agent Bradley Hall.
This MSS officer has no idea the U.S. government is onto him. But the FBI has his chats, texts, emails, even his personal diary. Hear how they got it on the Sixth Bureau podcast.
I now have several terabytes of an MSS officer, no doubt, no question, of his life. And that's a unicorn.
No one had ever seen anything like that. It was unbelievable.
This is a story of the inner workings of the MSS and how one man's ambition and mistakes opened its vault of secrets.
Listen to the Sixth Bureau on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to It Could Happen Here, a podcast about how society is falling apart and about how to put it back together again. I'm your host, Christopher Wong, and today, and for the next few days, we're doing something a bit different. We're going to take a deep dive into some of the people who got us into the mess we're in today. Now, when we've talked about our enemies on It Could Happen Here, we've mostly focused on fascism, and for good reason. But for the next few days, we're focusing on a different enemy, though don't worry, the Nazis will show up. That enemy is neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is the single most successful political movement of the 20th and 21st centuries. No other political movement in human history has directly controlled so much of the globe. It has outmaneuvered, outlasted, or simply destroyed every ideology that sought to oppose it, and has reigned virtually unchallenged for 50 years after it exploded onto the political scene in Chile. Their victory has been so total that even their erstwhile opponents have adopted its core principles. Margaret Thatcher famously bragged that her proudest accomplishment was creating Tony Blair, basking in the irony that neoliberalism would be implemented across the globe in large part by labor and socialist parties. Today, even erstwhile communist countries maintain so-called special economic zones, where the laws of neoliberalism are allowed to run rampant in exchange for GDP increases, and their communist supporters in the West have come to believe that capitalism is a far more powerful engine of economic development than the state planning advocated by their forebears, thus internalizing the greatest principle of neoliberalism even as they claim to oppose it. All of this, of course, raises two questions. What actually is neoliberalism, and how did it come to rule the world? Today, we're going to try to answer the first question by looking back at the original neoliberals and examining what they believed, because it's not what you think. There are many places you can begin the story of neoliberalism. I'm choosing to start in France in 1938. Now, the 1930s are a bad time to be a free trade market liberal, and just to clear this up early, liberal in the European context, which is where a lot of the beginning of the story takes place, does not mean the same thing as it does in the American context. European liberalism, up to this point, is about free trade, markets, individual liberty and rights, etc., but it's anti-state interference. To be somewhat reductive, it's kind of closer to what conservatism is in the US, but it's not identical, so bear that in mind as the story goes on. The 1930s saw the rise of fascism, social democracy, and communism, each with its own form of government spending and economic planning, which liberals absolutely detested. Now, the 1920s and 30s have been full of liberals gathering to try to figure out what to do next, and in 1937, Walter Lippmann, an American writer who would become most famous for inventing the term Cold War, wrote a book called An Inquiry into the Principles of the Good Society, which argued that totalitarianism was a product of not having individual private property and that the state needed to be limited to administering justice and not, giving people things that they need. And so a lot of liberals read this and go, oh, cool, we should organize a conference to talk about this book and our ideas. And the product is a 1938 Lippmann Colloquium. Now, a bunch of extremely important neoliberals show up at this conference, including one Friedrich August von Hayek, Ludwig von Mises, Wilhelm Röpke, and Alexander Rustow. And they start talking about the need for a new kind of liberalism to oppose communism, Keynesianism, fascism, and what they call Manchester laissez-faire liberalism, in which the state didn't intervene at all in political life and let the economy run on autopilot. Now, the German sociologist Alexander Rustow, who we're going to talk about more in a second, comes up with the term neoliberalism to define the new set of principles that they're trying to develop. And they think the new liberalism should prioritize the price mechanism, free enterprise, the system of competition, and importantly, a strong and impartial state. Now, this is the origin of neoliberalism as a term. And it's important to understand two things from the outset, because the neoliberals are going to spend the next 50 years lying about this. One, neoliberalism favors a strong state to make the market work. And two, neoliberalism is not the same thing as classical liberalism. Now, neoliberals essentially invented the whole I'm a classical liberal thing in the 50s, but if you read the original stuff that they wrote, if you go back to 1940s, if you go back to 1930s, and you read what they write, the neoliberals are extremely clear that they are not classical liberals, and that, in fact, their political project is different from the 20th century and 19th century liberal project, in which the state is supposed to be a night watchman and not actually interfere in the markets at all. The neoliberals originally, before they, start lying about their actual origins, reject this principle and come to believe that, in fact, a strong state is necessary to ensure that markets work. So now you have neoliberalism as a thing, but nothing really happens much until after World War II, because during World War II, almost everyone is just doing state economic planning. And so, all of these people rambling off to the side about how, the market is the most efficient way to plan a system. Nobody listens to them because they're fighting a war, and the way you fight wars is doing state planning. And after World War II, the situation for neoliberals is even worse, because having, gone through the experience of entire societies turning their entire economies and systems into planning agencies in order to, mobilize a total war effort, people after the war come back and go, oh, hey, we can do this to other parts of the economy. So this means that everyone, and this is not just the communist states, this is Britain, is doing Keynesianism, they're doing planning, they're doing state welfare programs, and the New Deal is spreading also across the globe. Now, in response to all of this, Hayek and his allies do two things. The first is found the Chicago School of Economics. And the second is to assemble the avengers of taking food from children, the Montpellier Society. The Montpellier Society is the central neoliberal institution, which is a weird thing because in a lot of ways, it's essentially just a closeted debate society intended to allow neoliberals to work out their political principles behind closed doors. Now, at this first meeting in 1947, a lot of the people from the Lippmann Colloquium are there, but unfortunately, some of the French members of the Colloquium and some of the people from Germany had collaborated with the Nazis, so they were out. And this meant that Hayek had to find new people to bring in. And the Montpellier Society's first meeting is the first time you actually have all three major schools of neoliberal thought in the same place at the same time arguing with each other. And they can't agree on shit. The only thing they can actually agree on is to look into more stuff. And to get a sense of how far away from modern neoliberalism the arguments that are being had at the Montpellier Society are, the Montpellier Society has only ever once actually released a single statement stating its principles. And this statement was the only thing that could be agreed on at the first meeting of the Montpellier Society, and I'm just going to read it. This is what they agreed to research. 1. The analysis and explanation of the present crisis so as to reflect its essential moral and economic origins. 2. The redefinition of the state's functions so as to distinguish more clearly between the totalitarian and liberal order. 3. Methods of reestablishing the rule of law and assuring its development so that individuals and groups are not in a position to encroach upon the freedom of others and private property rights are not allowed to become a basis of predatory power. 4. The possibility of establishing minimum standards by means not inimical to initiative and the functioning of the market. 5. Methods of combating the misuse of history for the furtherance of creeds hostile to liberty. 6. The problem of creating an international order conducive to safeguarding of peace and liberty and permitting the establishment of harmonious international economic relations. Just by looking at this, you can immediately see signs of how far things are going to move. I mean, one of the things that they're talking about is, again, they're trying to research whether or not it's possible to just give people things without the market. And it's not just the sort of left, quote unquote, wing of the neoliberals who are arguing about this. Hayek, in probably his most famous book, The Road to Serfdom, I mean, explicitly says, yeah, you should just give people food and housing and stuff outside of the market. And, you know, like today, if literally anyone who says this will be accused of socialism, this is the neoliberal, this is, you know, a large part of the neoliberal position in 1947. Now, I've mentioned briefly that there are three schools of neoliberalism. And we're going to spend some time looking at them because people have a tendency to look at neoliberalism and assume that, oh, it's just the Chicago School of Economics, you know, which is the neoclassical school. Its most famous member is Milton Friedman. And it's true that the Chicago School are neoliberals. But, and this is critical, there's other intellectual schools involved in here. And it's not just economists. Neoliberalism from the beginning is a multidisciplinary international project. You have lawyers, you have political scientists, you have journalists, you have philosophers, you have anthropologists, and the product of this is an ideology and a philosophy that is much deeper, much richer, and much more dangerous than just Chicago School alone. The second of the major schools is the Austrian school, which is led by Ludwig von Mises and Hayek. And maybe most importantly, but least well known, the third school that we're actually going to be talking about today is the German Ordoliberals, led by Alexander Rustow, who again invented the term neoliberalism, and Wilhelm Röpke, who almost no one has ever heard of, but are incredibly important. And I'm going to insert a disclaimer here before I get yelled at by nerds. Yes, I'm aware of the public choice theorists at the Virginia School. I am also aware of a group of the neoliberals who's called the Geneva School, even though they're just regular Ordoliberals. And there's also the rump of the neo-institutionalists. I don't care about them because they're not relevant to this story. Please do not yell at me on Twitter. Now, these people have wildly divergent beliefs. And so I'm going to do my best to do one-sentence summaries of what these people believe. So, the Chicago School of Neoclassical Economics. Humans are all-knowing, calculating gods, rationally optimizing their behavior to get the most out of every single interaction they engage in to maximize the utility. The product of this infinite freedom to choose is economic equilibrium. The Austrian School. Humans are pig-ignorant fucks who know literally nothing and therefore must be made to bow down to the ever-changing disequilibrium of the market, which is the only thing that can actually process information. Ordoliberalism. The markets won't create or balance itself because these uncultured proletarian swine keep asking for raises instead of focusing on the magic of the family, so we have to use the state and laws to force people and companies to do competition. And these are obviously somewhat comical summaries of it, but these are very, very different conceptions of what it is to be a human, of whether the market occurs naturally or not, of what the market actually is. Is it a product? Is it an object in and of itself? Is it a product? Is it just an inevitable product of humans doing whatever humans do? And this is part of the reason why it was almost impossible to get the original neoliberals to agree on anything. But this is actually one of the strengths of the neoliberal project. The project only works because it uses the products of all three branches. You have neoclassical attacks on the welfare state, Austrian attacks on central planning, and ordoliberal theories of the state, and sort of cultural and the non-economic nature of markets. And, you know, when one school essentially fails as an explanation for something, they can jump to another school. And this gives them a very wide range of ability to move between crises and move between people attacking any of the individual schools because they can simply pull out another set of theories. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about each of the schools. And we're going to start with the Chicago School because, again, it's the most famous. And because I think there's another very interesting story here into how the Chicago School changed from its origins. So one of the people who was supposed to be a founding member of the Chicago School was a man named Henry Simmons. And Simmons is unlike the rest of the Chicago School because he actually believes in things. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes from him. Thus, the great enemy of democracy is monopoly in all its forms. Gigantic corporate trade associations and other agencies for price control, trade unions, or in general, organization and concentration of power within functional classes. Here's another one. A monopolist is an implicit thief because his possession of market power leads to the exchange of commodities at prices that do not reflect underlying social scarcities. And, you know, you can see this sort of one of the classic neoliberal arguments, which is that, okay, so you have the market is efficient, and trade unions get in the way of the market because they're a monopoly. But Simmons has what kind of looks like from our perspective, a left-wing critique of monopolies, which is, giant corporate monopolies are thieves because they use their market power to rob people by charging higher prices. And it's I genuinely can't say how differently things would have gone if Simmons had actually been around to see the Chicago School through, because he commits suicide in 1946. And unlike every single other person who was going to be involved with the Chicago School from the beginning until now, Simmons had a genuine commitment to democracy and anti-monopoly principles. But unfortunately, he dies in 1946, and by the Chicago School is really up and running in the 50s, almost everyone involved in it is overtly pro-monopoly, pro-corporation, and are, they set up an antitrust school. But the thing that the antitrust school is arguing is that monopolies are actually essentially impossible because competition will just take care of everything. And if you try to stop monopolies from happening, it will interfere in the economy. Now, this is the line that Milton Friedman takes. And it's also the line of the Volcker Fund, who are a sort of, I guess you could call them a charitable organization, but it's basically a billionaire slush fund that funds the school. And they'd had real fights with Simmons because Simmons is like, well, okay, monopolies are bad. And Volcker is like, well, we're a monopoly, so you guys need to actually work for us. And by the time Friedman essentially takes over the Chicago School and Knight take it over, they're not just intellectual mercenaries. They're extremely proud of the fact that they are, in fact, pure intellectual mercenary hacks with absolutely dogshit economics. If you've ever read if you've ever been forced to take an economics class, you took microeconomics, that's basically just what the Chicago School believes. It's everyone's a rational actor. Every human being spends all of their time trying to calculate the maximum utility of anything that they do. Everything is a market. Everything functions by supply and demand. Markets are perfectly efficient if you just let them alone and don't interfere with them. Everything the state does interferes with the market, etc., etc. This is the thing that is sort of classically understood to be neoliberalism's core content. But it's extremely important to understand that these are not the only neoliberals. And in fact, not only are these not the only neoliberals, this set of political principles, to a large extent, is not what the neoliberals actually believe. This kind of stuff is essentially what they feed the rubes. Small state, taxes bad, regulation bad. Everything is a market and has always been a market, and all human interactions will inevitably produce markets. But to understand what neoliberals actually believe, we need to talk about the order liberals. Now, the two most important order liberals are Wilhelm Röpke and W.W. Rousseau, who were both exiles during the Nazi regime. Now, a lot of the other order liberals who stayed in Nazi Germany collaborated with the Nazi regime, which is something that's kind of just overlooked and brushed to the side when people write about them. But Röpke and Rousseau's status as people who, fled the Nazis gives them a kind of social cachet that their colleagues don't have, and they become extremely important. Now, in some ways, the order liberals could be considered the left wing of the neoliberals. They are significantly less harsh on the welfare state than other forms of neoliberalism, and this is in large part because the order liberals are the first neoliberals to ever actually hold any power. And I think most people tend to think that the first time neoliberalism was ever implemented was Chile, but that's not really true. The order liberals are actually very powerful in 1950s Germany. Now, the problem they face is that the left is powerful enough in 1950s Germany that they cannot actually just completely eliminate the welfare state. So their solution is to create this thing called the social market. And the order liberals get accused of being crypto socialists by a lot of the other neoliberals, but that's not really what's going on. The very important thing about the order liberals is that unlike the Chicago School, they're not economists. Both Röpke and Rousseau are social scientists. Rousseau's a sociologist. And they argue that the state and the market alone cannot maintain market society because market society produces dislocation. It produces atomization. It destroys social cohesion. And this means that you need a social, political, and sort of cultural framework to maintain it. And their major focus is on providing stability and security for the working class and a new sense of sort of identity and cultural cohesion. Because I think if the working class is essentially left to itself, it will create massification, cultural decay, and Eventually, the working class will turn into the proletariat, and that will give you either communism or fascism. The order liberals believe that there's a kind of natural hierarchical order that they're trying to preserve, and that this is essentially what ordo means. It means literally order, which accords with the essence of humans. This means an order in which proportion, measure, and balance exist. Now, they have a few ways that they're going to do this. Ropke is obsessed with something called structural policy. And structural policy is basically the argument that the conditions for markets have to be specifically created. And again, they're not just economic conditions, they're social conditions. And this is fused with Rousseau's Vital Politique, which is essentially about the power of anthropological and human aspects of culture and politics that are beyond the forces of production that they think are vital to sort of the functioning of society. And part of what they're doing here is that they want to give some people a cultural thing to focus on, so they stop talking about like wages and welfare and who owns production. But the combination of Vital Politique and structural policy gets you order liberalism. So nominally they focus on individuals, but really what they're focusing on as the family, as this quote-unquote decentralized engine of economic capitalism, with small businesses and hopefully small family farms as a sort of apolitical social support base for capitalism, which they're going to promote and set against the radicalism of the sort of industrial proletariat. And this sort of middle class that they're aspiring to build is extremely important for a number of reasons. Partially as a way to diffuse working class tension, partially as a way to sort of offer workers something to aspire to, and partly as a way to fuse the sort of traditional natural hierarchy with conceptions of meritocracy. Now, Ropke in particular also begins to look for systems outside of just the democratic state to sort of create this legal apparatus that the neoliberals want to use to impose markets. And this is extremely important because a lot of where neoliberalism winds up coming from is not from national governments, it's from this sort of international bureaucracy. It's from the IMF, it's from the World Bank, it's from the World Trade Organization. And those groups are controlled by neoliberal lawyers. And Ropke is the person who essentially first has this idea. Now, the goal of using these international legal institutions as a way of creating the laws to sort of enforce neoliberalism is using it as a way to sort of get around democracy. And I'm going to read this quote from Ropke because, oh boy, does he absolutely not believe in freedom and democracy in the way that he and everyone else talks about publicly. It is possible that in my opinion of the strong state, I am even more fascistischer than you yourself, because I would indeed like to see all economic policy decisions concentrated in the hand of a fully independent and vigorous state weakened by no pluralist authorities of a corporatist kind. I see the strength of the state in the intensity, not extensiveness, of its economic policies. How the constitutional legal structure of such a state should be designed is a question in and of itself for which I have no patent receipt to offer. I share your opinion that the old formulas of parliamentary democracy have proven themselves useless. People must get used to the fact that there is also a presidential, authoritarian, even, yes, horrible thing to say, dictatorial democracy. So what he's saying there is that he's sending a letter to one of his friends, and he's going, yeah, I'm even more fascist than you are. I think that democracy is actually a threat to the market, and that in order to avoid authoritarian democracy, we should in fact concentrate all economic decision-making power in the hands of a narrow elite in a strong state, which is, the opposite of everything that neoliberals openly claim to be supporting. But behind closed doors, and we will get into more of this in a second, this is what they actually believe. Now, Ropke is somewhat unique among neoliberals in that he is racist by neoliberal standards. He's just enormously, incredibly racist. So, for example, he's a massive apartheid dude. And again, I need to point this out. Ropke is one of the most important neoliberals. He's one of the founding members of the Montpellier Society, although he gets kicked out for, well, he eventually leaves because of some disputes he has with Hayek. But, I'm going to read some of the things that he says about South Africa because they're horrible. Quote, "The South African Negro is not only a man of an utterly different race, but at the same time stems from a completely different type and level of civilization. He also calls ending apartheid, quote, national suicide." And, so he starts saying this stuff, and the other neoliberals are like, dude, what the fuck? So the neoliberal newspaper, he wrote for 30 years, was just like, what? And published a bunch of students going, stop this. This is, you cannot seriously be supporting apartheid like this. And his response, and the newspaper is called the NZZ, and his response is, quote, "These NZZ neo-intellectuals will not be satisfied until they let a real cannibal speak." Now, Ropke is one of his friends, another MPS member named Hunold. So Hayek looks at Ropke's support for apartheid and is like, what the fuck? Like, no, absolutely not. Like, this is horrible. Why are you doing this? You know, to Hayek's credit, that this is the extent of the credit I will give Hayek in this episode, is that he looks at just the open, overt racism of Ropke and is like, no. And when he does this, Ropke's friend Hunold says that Hayek, quote, now advocates one man, one vote and race mixing. Now, you can see a lot of things here about Ropke that are extremely scary. And one of those things is that the language that he's speaking, this the West is committing national suicide, the clash of civilizations, race war stuff. You know, this is essentially literally the national suicide thing is what white nationalists say today. And Ropke is, in a lot of ways, a white nationalist. He's just sort of a German one. But what's really scary about Ropke is that he's not sort of bound by the sort of strictures of a Chicago neoclassical economist. So, for example, he won't propose that like the dating market, like dating should be a market, and that rich like men should be able to like go on an app and like every single time a person gets into a relationship, it should just be entirely based on market exchange and stuff like that. Because, you know, he doesn't think like an economist. He thinks about cultural factors. He thinks about sort of social factors. But he's cracked the code for how neoliberalism is going to be implemented. The way you do neoliberalism is neoliberalism plus racism. And he realizes that you need neoliberalism's actual sort of policies, right, will cause atomization, will cause social dislocation, will cause the existing social structures of society to sort of implode. And he realizes that in order to get this to work, you need a spiritual base. You need some kind of new thing that you can use to sort of bring all these people together. And he picks Catholicism, which doesn't work because, I mean, there's a number of reasons for this, but, you know, partially it's too early, partially it's because he picks Catholicism and not evangelicalism. But this is how the neoliberals are eventually going to take power, by, you know, aligning themselves with the evangelicals who promise to solve the atomization they're creating with, you know, religion and family and the patriarchy. And he figures this out in like the 60s. But it was just, you know, like 20 years before the rest of the neoliberals figured it out. Now, there's the, Ropke has like a bunch of very similar stuff that he thinks about this, about Rhodesia. But interestingly, he has more support for his positions on Rhodesia than he does for his positions on South Africa. And now we're gonna jump back to Chicago School and we're gonna read some Milton Friedman stuff about Rhodesia because, dear God, quote, "Majority rule for Rhodesia today is a euphemism for a black minority government, which would almost surely mean both the eviction or exodus of most of the whites and also a drastically lower living level and opportunity for the black masses of Rhodesia." Here's another one where he's describing the system of one person, one vote. Quote, "A system of highly weighted voting in which special interests have far greater role to play than does the general interest." You know, so that's his description of what democracy is. In contrast, he thinks the market economy is, quote, "a system of effective proportional representation." Now, Friedman also thinks that, you know, so there's a blockade, like an economic blockade of Rhodesia going on because they're Rhodesia and they are maybe the worst people ever. That's probably only a mild exaggeration. Yeah, it's just, you know, absolutely fanatical, like white supremacist government. And Friedman also calls the isolation of Rhodesia, quote, "the suicide of the West." And, you know, he's doing this on racial lines, but he's also doing this along the lines of this argument that democracy itself is actually bad, and this is the place that he can express it because, you know, he can leverage racism to get away with it. And I'm going to read another Friedman quote because I think it's important to understand what the neoliberals actually think about democracy. Quote, "This was sometimes admitted by members of Mount Pelion in public, but only when they felt that their program was in the ascent. Let's be clear, I don't believe in democracy in one sense. You don't believe in democracy. Nobody believes in democracy. You will find it hard to find anybody who will say that if democracy is interpreted as majority rule. You will find it hard to find anybody who will say that 55% of the people believe the other 45% of the people should be shot. That's an appropriate exercise of democracy. What I believe is not a democracy, but an individual freedom in a society in which individuals cooperate with one another." So he's making a sort of, what's in some ways a kind of anarchist argument against democracy, which is that, like, yeah, okay, so if you interpret democracy as pre-majority rule, then a majority can just do a terrible thing to the minority. But, you know, what the neoliberals actually mean by this is that 55% of the population could, for example, I don't know, take money from the rich small part of the population and distribute it around, and they think that is totalitarianism. And in order to stop that from happening, they are, in fact, absolutely and perfectly willing to just back dictatorships, and you know, that's in essence what they actually want is a state the sole function of which essentially is to ensure that nobody ever does this. And you know, if you can do this inside of a democratic framework, fine. But if you can't, well, I don't know, it's time for a coup. We're going to turn to Hayek and the Austrians, because Hayek also is known as this sort of like, as a libertarian, as this person who sort of believes in spontaneous order and like thinks that you should only have sort of small decentralized political institutions. And so we're going to watch Hayek quote a bunch of stuff from and agree with a bunch of stuff from Carl Schmitt, which is again incredible because Hayek elsewhere describes Schmitt as, quote, the Nazis' chief jurist, which is true. But here are some other things that Hayek has said about Carl Schmitt. Quote, "The weakness of the government of an omnipotent democracy was very clearly seen by the extraordinary German student of politics, Carl Schmitt, who in the 1920s probably understood the character of the developing form of government better than most people." And, you know, Hayek believes a lot of the same things that Schmitt does. So, you know, one of them, the things that Schmitt is like big on is that liberalism and democracy are opposite things. And Hayek also believes this. And okay, so I'm going to read some Schmitt, and then I'm going to read some Hayek, and they're going to be saying the same thing. So here's Schmitt. "Only a strong state can preserve and enhance a free market. Only a strong state can generate genuine decentralization and bring about free and autonomous domains." Here's Hayek. "If we proceed on the assumption that only the exercises of freedom that the majority will are important, we would be certain to create a stagnant society with all the characteristics of unfreedom." So what Hayek, Schmitt is saying that only a strong state can support a free market and do decentralization. Hayek is saying if you let a democracy exist that has majority rule, it will create unfreedom. Now, we will get into this more when we talk about like Chile, because oh boy, is there some other shit that Hayek has to do with that. But most neoliberals hate democracy no matter what they say in public. And this is the other important thing here. Neoliberals lie. They lie constantly. They lie to the point where sorting out their actual beliefs becomes almost impossible, and even their intellectual enemies believe the lies that they tell. What most people think the neoliberals believe is that, you know, they want a small government and liberty in an unregulated market that will occur naturally through spontaneous order because it's human nature to want to truck and barter and rationally calculate things. And the neoliberals don't believe any of this. This is just what they tell to the rubes. What they actually want is a large and powerful surveillance and legal state and a massive bureaucracy to enforce essentially pro-corporate policies at gunpoint. I'm going to close out this episode by reading a list of things that Philip Murawski, who's an economic historian who studies neoliberalism, whose work I've used a lot for these episodes, wrote about the sort of 11 principles of what neoliberals actually believe. 1, free markets do not occur naturally. They must be actively constructed through political organizing. 2, the market is an information processor and the most efficient one possible, more efficient than any government or any single human being could be. Truth can only be validated by the market. 3, market society is, and therefore should be, the natural and inexorable state of humankind. The political goal of neoliberals is not to destroy the state, but to take control of it and to redefine its structure and function in order to create and maintain the market-friendly culture. 5, There is no contradiction between public politics, citizen, and private market entrepreneur consumer, because the latter does and should eclipse the former. 6. The most important virtue, more important than justice or anything else, is freedom, defined negatively as freedom to choose. Most importantly, defined as the freedom to acquiesce to the imperatives of the market. 7. Capital has a natural right to flow freely across national borders. 8. Inequality of resources, income, wealth, and even political rights is a good thing. It promotes productivity because people envy the rich and emulate them. People who complain about inequality are either sore losers or old fogies who need to get hip to the way things work nowadays. 9. Corporations can do no wrong. By definition, competition will take care of all problems, including any tendency monopoly. 10. The market, engineered and promoted by neoliberal experts, can always provide a solution to the problems seemingly endlessly caused by the market in the first place. There's always an app for that. 11. There's no difference between is and should be. Free markets both should be, normatively, and are, positively, the most efficient economic system, and the most just way of doing politics, and the most empirically true description of human behavior, and the most ethical and moral way to live, which in turn explains, justifies why there are versions of free markets should be and, as neoliberals build more and more power, increasingly are universal. Yeah, we've read a long list of things. But essentially the point of this is that neoliberals want to transform everything into the market because they think the market is a more efficient way of doing things and a better and more moral and more just way of doing things than anything else you could possibly imagine, including, things like democracy. And, and any problem the system produces will be solved by the system. Now, this is an incredibly radical political program in a lot of ways, in that you can argue whether it's a radical or reactionary program. I mean, I think it's a deeply reactionary one in some ways, but it is a program that is vastly different than anything else that has come before it. Now, the challenge, of course, was getting anyone else to agree to this. And the answer is that it's really hard to. It is extremely hard to convince people that, everyone should bow down to the market, et cetera, et cetera. And so the only way they can actually do this is by lying. Now, as Murawski describes, the neoliberals operate an incredibly sophisticated intellectual and political network that forms a sort of Matryoshka doll, with Mont Pelerin Society at its center, and an ever-expanding group of more and less specialized think tanks as the shell layers. So in this way, they mirror the vanguard structure and sort of front group networks of their communist opponents, but they have significantly better financial backing. And this means that, they can run the American Enterprise Institute and, with copious amounts of Coke money. They can run this entire enormous network of think tanks that allow them to sort of act as a government in waiting. And the other thing that they're going to attempt to do is take over the global regulatory bureaucracy, the IMF, the World Bank, eventually the World Trade Organizations, and force people to do this at gunpoint by using those organizations. Now, all they needed was a crisis that they could use to implement their policies. And next week, we're going to look at the crisis that gave them exactly what they wanted. This has been It Could Happen Here. Find us on Instagram and on Twitter at Happen Here Pod. Find the rest of our stuff at Cool Zone. And goodbye.
Hi, this is Joe Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And I just sat down with a Minnie Driver.
The Irish traveller said when I was 16, you're going to have a terrible time with men.
Actor, storyteller, and unapologetic Aquarian visionary. Aquarius is all about freedom-loving and different perspectives, and I find a lot of people with strong placements in Aquarius are misunderstood. A Sun and Venus in Aquarius in her 7th house spark her unconventional approach to partnership.
He really has taught me to embrace people sleeping in different rooms, on different houses, in different places, but just an embracing of the isness of it all.
If you're navigating your own transformation or just want a chart-side view into how a leading artist integrates astrology, creativity, and real life, this episode is a must listen. Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Echard, and in 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
Unfortunately, it didn't go according to plan. He became the first Bachelor to ever have his final rose rejected. The internet turned on him,
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
But what happened to Clayton after the show made even bigger headlines. It began as a one-night stand and ended in a courtroom, with Clayton at the center of a very strange paternity scandal.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
Police search warrant.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. This is Love Trapped. This season, an epic battle of he said, she said, and the search for accountability in a sea of lies.
I have done nothing except get pregnant by the Bachelor!
Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome to the A Building. I'm Hans Charles.
I'm Menelik Lumumba. It's 1969. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. had both been assassinated, and Black America was at a breaking point. Rioting and protests broke out on an unprecedented scale.
In Atlanta, Georgia, at Martin's alma mater, Morehouse College, the students had their own protest. It featured two prominent figures in Black history, Martin Luther King Sr. and a young student, Samuel L. Jackson.
To be in what we really thought was a revolution. I mean, people were dying.
1968, the murder of Dr. King, which traumatized everyone.
The FBI had a role in the murder of a Black Panther leader in Chicago.
This story is about protest. It echoes in today's world far more than it should, and it will blow your mind.
Listen to the A Building on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
In 2023, a story gripped the UK, evoking horror and disbelief.
The nurse who should have been in charge of caring for tiny babies is now the most prolific child killer in modern British history.
Everyone thought they knew how it ended. A verdict, a villain, a nurse named Lucy Letby.
Lucy Letby has been found guilty.
But what if we didn't get the whole story?
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we follow the evidence and hear from the people that lived it to ask what really happened when the world decided who Lucy Letby was.
No voicing of any skepticism or doubt.
It'll cause so much harm at every single level of the British establishment of this is wrong.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I mean, that's all I got today. Who's taking over? Come on. I did my part.
I guess it's me. I guess it's me.
All right. Well, then what show is this and what do we do?
This is It Could Happen Here. We talk about things being bad and also what you can do about them, but this is a things are bad episode and not a what you can do about them episode. Specifically, this is part 2 of what I guess you could call our mini series on neoliberalism. And so, yesterday we talked a lot about who the original neoliberals are. They have a bit of power in Germany in the 50s, but for the 50s and 60s and up to the 70s, they're kind of nobodies. They have a couple of think tanks, but they're kind of just siloed off in the corner, and they yell at people, and people kind of ignore them. And what they're waiting for essentially is the right crisis. And in the 1970s, they finally find that crisis. Now, I think it's kind of hard to remember in a lot of ways because of how the 80s went, but in the early 1970s, things are not looking good for capitalism. I mean, Allende wins his election in 1970. We'll talk about what happened there in another episode. But, it's not just that. In 1974, well, so through the whole early 1970s, Amilcar Cabral is just absolutely annihilating the Portuguese army, and he wins. He fights one of history's greatest guerrilla wars, and this basically destroys the entire Portuguese state and causes the Carnation Revolution. The Portuguese colonies get free. The Derg takes power in Ethiopia, and then 1975, the North Vietnam just wins the war in Vietnam, and now the product of this is that Cambodia falls, Laos falls. There's 5 socialist states in East and East Asia, in Southeast Asia. and also Mongolia, but nobody really cares about them. And as all of this is happening, as the anti-colonial armies are sort of marching their way through the world, there's an enormous economic crisis. And there's a lot of things happening at the same time. One of the ones I think is probably the thing that people remember the most is there's just unbelievable inflation. And and economic growth starts to slow down, although something I think that we do need to keep in mind is that when I say economic growth slows, so economic growth from 1969 to 1979 is about 3.2%. From 2000 to 2007, it was 2.3% in the US. And so, when I say there's an economic crisis going on here, economic growth in the 70s is better than any decade since, but it's still considered the crisis decade because there's much inflation. And, everyone has their own theory as to why this is happening, because the sort of Keynesians who've been in power, whose thing is, we can, if there's ever an economic crisis, we can spend money, and that, then the government spending money will drag everyone out of the crisis. But in Keynesian theory, there's not supposed to be inflation if unemployment is increasing and there's an economic crisis, there's not supposed to be inflation. And suddenly there's both. And so the Keynesians have nothing, and they're sort of just running around just with basically chickens with their head cut off, going, oh God, we have no idea what's happening. We don't know what's happening. And so into this gap steps a bunch of weirdos. And so I'm gonna go through a few of the theories as to why this crisis happened, because I don't know, and I think there's elements of truth in most of the stories, ish, kind of, but this is extremely complicated, and there's still no consensus on it. So I'm going to start with the most crank, which is the Ron Paul people. Whole thing is everything went to shit and has been shit ever since because the U.S. abandoned the gold standard, and they're right to the extent that this happened. So basically, Nixon's been trying to pay for the Vietnam War and he can't, and the U.S. dollar has been pegged to a certain amount of gold, right? And you can do this thing where if you have an American dollar, you can exchange it for that amount of gold. And so Charles de Gaulle just is okay, we're going to take all of this gold. And so he does, and the U.S. starts running out of gold. And so by in the early 70s, Nixon is like, fuck this, you can't actually exchange dollars for gold anymore. And now every single libertarian starts every rant with fiat currency. But this does have an effect on the economy, which we'll talk about more in a bit. There's a lot of other explanations for this. The modern monetary theory people, if you listen to them, and also Peter Thiel, weirdly, will argue, it's all because of the oil shock, because oil prices increased. Neoliberals will essentially, they blame too much government spending, welfare programs, and then wages being too high, and also bad monetary policy. There's an entire... There's 17 different Marxist explanations for it, some of which are... I'll talk about 1.5 of them that are more plausible. One of the explanations has to do with how essentially, so the other thing that's happening in the 60s and 70s is that minorities and women are entering the workplace and are, actually demanding to be paid the wages that white men have been being paid. And corporations essentially just can't afford this. And so, they have two choices. It's either we pay these people actual wages or we just murder everyone. And they took the second one. So it's something that has also been happening through this whole period is that profit rates in manufacturing just keep collapsing. And there's a whole thing here about some Marxist theory stuff. But the thing that's important is that and this does happen in the 70s, is eventually you hit a point where manufacturing growth becomes zero sum. And, so you can have manufacturing growth in one country, but you can't have it in another because at a certain point, you're producing too much stuff and people start getting kicked out of the labor process. And this has a bunch of effects. One is it means you get a bunch of people who are unemployed. And two, it means that there's just a bunch of money floating around that nobody can actually invest in places. And this is, all of the weird stuff the Saudis do is basically from this money. There's these whole piles of oil money that are just sitting around that nobody can invest in anything. And that's going to cause, that's going to cause a lot of stuff down the road. But for now, we'll talk about the debt crisis this causes sort of next episode. But for now, I'm going to try to pull all of these together and like have a coherent thing that makes sense, which is essentially by the end of the 70s, profit rates are declining, and then Nixon pulls the dollar off the gold standard, and this causes the value of the dollar to just plunge. And this is the thing that sets off the 1970s oil crisis. So the 1970s oil crisis is weird because it's not an oil crisis. Everyone looks at the oil crisis and goes, "Oh, it's an oil crisis. It's a crisis because there wasn't enough oil," and it's not. It has nothing to do with that. It has literally nothing to do with supply of oil at all. What actually happens is that, so you have OPEC, right? OPEC is the alliance of oil producing cartels. And they have this extremely complicated system where they sell oil to oil companies, and then the oil companies sell that oil, they refine it and sell it to you. And they have this incredibly convoluted tax structure on it. And eventually, so the oil companies are having the price of oil starts to rise, and the oil companies are basically just taking it all of the profit from this. And so OPEC goes, "Okay, you guys are going to pay taxes." And the oil companies just refuse. And so OPEC just unilaterally is like, "Okay, you guys are going to pay taxes, and we're going to make you pay taxes by just increasing the price that we sell you oil at." And this gets remembered as like OPEC increasing the price of oil, even though it was literally just them saying you're going to pay taxes. Now, this is the part that's very weird, which is that, okay, so I don't know, if you two heard of the oil crisis, like the story.
Oh yeah. I mean, I the way it's always gone in textbooks is you talk about like the stagflation of the 70s and the fucking lines of cars at gas stations going back blocks because of OPEC fuckery, and that's how it's always framed, is that like there's this big political crisis over OPEC that led to the gas supply getting throttled, and it came at a time when the economy had already slowed down and everything got terrible, and then a few years later we got RoboCop.
Yeah, well, we did get RoboCop, but the important thing about the story is that every single thing about that story is wrong. Every part of it.
There were lines at gas stations.
Yeah. I mean, there are lines at gas stations, but the lines at the gas stations have literally nothing to do with OPEC. There's just nothing. So on October 16th, 1973, the Arab members of OPEC are like, "Fuck it, we're going to make the oil companies pay more for oil." And then the rest of OPEC follows them. Now, 2 days later, or is it? Yeah, the next day, there is a completely unrelated thing to all of this, which is that while this is going on, the Yom Kippur War starts, and so Egypt and Syria attack Israel, basically attack the Israel occupation forces in their country, and the war is going really badly for them. It's not going as badly as like the previous wars had gone for the Arab powers, but it's not going great. And so on October 17th, 6 Arab oil producing countries declare that they're cutting the amount of oil they export by 5% per month until Israel returns its territories that they'd occupied since 1967, and they have an embargo on the U.S. But, and this is the very important part, this has nothing to do with OPEC. This is not OPEC at all. It's not. This is just a couple of random Arab countries are like, we're going to do this, and and I think what I think is interesting about Robert, what you're talking about is OPEC fuckery. Is how this gets remembered, and this is one of the things that neoliberals use to sort of push their model of the world, right? Which is that everything functions off of supply and demand, and oh look, hey, the Arabs cut the supply of oil, and that's why the prices rose. But it's just wrong. It's empirically wrong. The price cut happened. I mean, the price increases happened the day before the price increases the day before the embargo, and the embargo and the oil price people are different groups. They have nothing to do with each other. But this gets sort of system like this. This is how it's remembered, and it's not even just how it's remembered. Like the Encyclopedia Britannica has the date in which all of this stuff happens wrong. They have the sequence of events wrong. Like most of the people who write about this remember this whole thing wrong. And this is part of the sort of an enormous propaganda effort that the neoliberals are able to do at this moment, which is they convince everyone that, oh yeah, the price increases and the gas, specifically the gas shortages, are about OPEC. But again, also like the US only imports like 7% of its oil from the countries who are doing the embargo at this point. So the actual thing that's going on has to do with price. It's a weird thing, it has to do with price controls, and gas companies are hoarding gas because they don't want to sell it at price control levels and stuff like that. But the oil price increases, it is bad. Like the price of oil does go up and there are shortages, but it has nothing to do with it has nothing to do with the embargo. It has nothing to do with, the supply of oil going down. It's just companies didn't want to pay taxes. And so they started hoarding their oil instead of selling it. And they passed the tax increase on to the consumers instead of just paying it. And as we talked about before, once this sort of like tax increase goes in, some of the OPEC countries want to do goes into place, like the price of oil does increase. And this does fuck the economy even more, but the economy had already been sort of a mess before this. And it has one other very important effect. And this is, I guess the theme of this episode is that the oil embargo matters, but the oil embargo matters because people think it matters, not because it did anything. And so it matters in the US because everyone thinks that, the scary Arab nations are coming for us. But it matters in the rest of the world because everyone else looks at this and goes, wait, hold on. You can actually use commodities, essentially. You can use commodity prices, like countries that like have raw, commodities can use this control to actually go fight, to go fight the West and go fight the capitalists and go get money for themselves. And this leads us into something, Robert Garrison, have either of you ever heard of the G77?
Is that like the 77 countries that have the most money?
Well, that's the G7.
Well, yeah, but I was assuming the 77 might be just a longer list.
So this is the other thing from this period that just is completely lost. That's almost completely lost to history. And the G77 is actually still around. But what they are was, so in the 60s, you have all of these countries that have recently gained independence in the 60s and 70s. All these countries that have gained independence from their sort of colonial overlords. And they start to band together into basically a voting bloc in the UN. And also, this is the other weird part about the story is that, so in the 1970s and 60s, 70s in particular, the UN actually matters. Like it's a thing that people actually
there was that like
believe.
20-ish years after World War II where people were like, maybe, I mean, a good example of the degree to which the UN actually used to be meaningful is watch the first Street Fighter movie. Because the good guys in that are clearly based off the UN, and nobody thinks it's ridiculous that the United Nations are actually doing something. It's fine to have Jean-Claude Van Damme be the leader of the United Nations, fist fighting a guy. That makes total sense in the early 1990s.
And and part of, we'll talk about this more next episode, but basically, so the reason the UN is a joke right now is because of what the US was doing to stop the G77 from doing anything.
I mean, I would argue that massive failures in Rwanda and Bosnia had a huge impact on that, too.
That too, yeah.
A couple of genocides go down and people are like, well, what are these guys doing? But yeah.
Well, this is how they got dysfunctional to the point where you can get that.
Yeah.
Which is,
okay.
So you have, you have a bunch of countries that call themselves, the term they use for themselves is the third world. Mm-hmm. And they come together to form this group, and it's a really weird ideological mixed bag. Like, I mean, you have like actual socialists like Tanzania's Julius Nyerere and Michael Morley in Jamaica. You've also got like Gaddafi and the Baathists, and like both
Gaddafi was a socialist. Come on, leftist paradise. Gaddafi's Libya.
My most contrarian hot take is that Salah Jadid was like actually kind of an ML who was he was briefly the Ba'athist in charge of Syria, and then he got overthrown by Hafiz al-Assad. But both of them are part of this.
There's definite like actual like Marxist, Lenin. There's some like especially in the old school Baathists, like there were aspects of that. There was socialism kind of within it. It would be nonsense to, like, for example, call Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist government a socialist government.
And you can already see like this is a real grab bag. And there's also just a bunch of random Latin American countries, like none of whom you can call socialist, And then there's also Saudi Arabia and Thailand are in this group.
Okay.
To get a sense of how fractious this is, India and Pakistan are also both part of this, and they fight 2 full-scale wars while they're both in the G77. Actually, that's not even true. There's 2 full-scale wars, and then there's like another half war they fight in the 90s.
Yeah.
So like all the people in this thing are literally fighting wars against each other. It's kind of a mess. And, you know, it's founded in the mid-60s. And until 1974, it's kind of, their whole thing is we have moral authority. Like we have the authority of all of these nations have colonized us for a long time, and we're going to use that. But in the 70s, you know, the oil embargo happens, and a lot, like most of the OPEC states are in the G77, and they look at the oil embargo and they look at OPEC raising prices. And they go, wait, we can do this too. And the OPEC states are like, oh, hey, we can use this to push we can use it to like push the whole power of the third world. And their plan to do this is something called the New International Economic Order, which is also something that no one has ever heard of. That is extremely important. That has just. So I guess the spoiler alert is that this movement gets crushed so thoroughly that nobody knows what the New Economic Order is, and the third world is now a slur. But, you know, the thing that they're trying to do is create, everybody calls the New International Economic Order a trade union of the poor. And so it's this thing they're trying to get passed through the UN that would, just designed to sort of ensure the economic sovereignty of these developing nations. And I'm going to read a list of the stuff that's in here. So an absolute right of states to control the extraction and marketing of their domestic natural resources. B, the establishment and recognition of state-managed resource cartels to stabilize and raise commodity prices. C, the regulation of transnational corporations. D, no strings attached technology transfers from north to south. E, the granting of preferential trade preferences to countries in the south. And F, forgiveness for certain debts that states in the south owe to the north. So this is like this thing. If the International Economic Order had ever been implemented at all, it would have completely reversed the balance of economic power, shifting it basically from countries like the U.S., Western Europe, like Japan, that are these giant manufacturing powerhouses, to countries that produce raw materials. And there would have and the other thing that would have happened from this is. You have the no strings. You have debt relief for the global south, and also these technology transfers. And the plan is basically to create a bunch of mini OPECs for not even mini OPECs. Create OPECs basically for every commodity. So you'd have like an OPEC, but it's for like bauxite or like copper. And you have all these OPECs, and each one of them uses their power, and they all cooperate to make sure that there's a stable price for all of these commodities. And another part of this is that it's supposed to basically enshrine the right of countries to be able to just like nationalize resource companies. So, you have like a British oil company. I was like, well, we just take it out. Now it's ours. And the threat of this is great enough that if you read conservatives in the era, they will say things like the Soviet Union is no longer a threat. The greatest danger to the West today is the G77.
Yeah.
And these people are enormously
right
powerful.
Past that.
Yeah, no one even remembers this anymore. And it's because of just how just unbelievably badly these guys got stomped. And one of the other things that happens out of the product of this is where the G7 comes from. And it's originally, and I think this is another thing.
Oh.
So, yeah, the other fun part about this, so the G7 is originally a secret alliance. Like through the whole 70s, nobody knows G7 exists. It's basically, it starts as this like secret meeting of a bunch of finance ministers. And eventually they add Canada and I think Japan to it, and it goes up to 7 members. And they have a couple of things they're trying to deal with. They're trying to deal with the economic collapse, but one of the biggest things they're dealing with is the G77 and OPEC. And the result of this is these enormous series of fights in implausibly the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, which is I think this is the last time ever that the fate of the entire world would be decided in a battle in like a subcommittee of the UN. And there's years and years and years of negotiations between, well, the G7 hasn't like openly declared itself as G7. It's sort of just, it's basically the rich European countries. So it's Canada, France, Germany, Italy, the UK, the US, and Japan, like form this alliance and are like locked in together in order to stop the G77 from doing anything. And this is the other crisis that the neoliberals are responding to. Is it's not just, and in many ways this is the one that scares them more, because it's not just that there's an economic crisis. It's not just that like capitalists are afraid because they're losing money. It's, if this stuff goes through, the entire balance of power in the entire global economy is going to change. And it's going to swing into the favor of a bunch of non-Western countries. And probably most importantly for the neoliberals, they're going to enshrine the right of states to take things away from corporations and regulate them. And this is just absolutely, completely unacceptable to both the neoliberals and just every single other organization that's even tangentially involved with sort of the Western nations. So the neoliberals, I talked about this a bit in the last episode, which is that they've been working on a strategy in order to take power that doesn't rely on states. And so what they've been doing for about 20 years is essentially infiltrating and working their way up through, like basically taking over the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, who in this period, and this is another thing I think is very weird and hard to remember, which is that the IMF and the World Bank, like, there was a time when they weren't completely evil. Like the IMF was basically set up to make sure that countries wouldn't just run out of money, right? It was supposed to give people and then the World Bank was supposed to be
and it's turned into sort of this like international debt system for poorer countries where they're always in hot and being forced into austerity measures and the like. Yeah, and that didn't used to be true. It used to be, the IMF had a bunch of Keynesians in it, and same with the World Bank. And both the IMF and the World Bank's leadership for a lot of this period wanted to negotiate. And and I think this is where we're going to leave it here, with basically the entire world is in an epochal crisis. There is all the economies are collapsing. The armies of the anti-colonial like world are moving, and the G77 looks like it's literally on the verge of completely restructuring the economic system in a way that actually would have been slightly more fair and just than what the system that existed then, which was also infinitely more just and fair than the system that exists now. And next episode, we're going to talk about how this all fell apart and how there was a choice in the 70s between either corporations can make money or people can have things. And the product of what the neoliberals are going to do in the next episode is that they are going to, their solution to this problem is to tell the entire wretched of the earth to eat shit and die. And that's the episode. It's history.
Yeah, it's a
fun time. Okay. Well, we got any pluggables? What do we do at the end of episodes? Sophie, where are we?
Thank you.
Who are we?
Thank you for listening. We'll be back on a day at a time, maybe.
We're not hearing you, Sophie. I think you're muted.
I'm not muted.
Oh,
what?
There we go.
I'm not muted. I haven't been muted the whole time.
We didn't hear you.
I just randomly halfway through.
That's so weird. I said we'll be back on a day or a time.
At some point we'll be back. Find us then.
Yeah.
And find us tomorrow, unless this comes out on Friday. In which case,
this is coming out Friday.
Be with your family. Be with the ones you love.
This is dropping on Friday.
Adopt a cat. Adopt 2 cats.
Maybe 4.
Adopt 3 cats.
4.
Adopt 4 cats. Yeah. Get a number of cats greater than the number you have and put them in your house. We'll see you on Monday.
What?
Hey, we'll be back Monday with more episodes every week from now until the heat death of the universe.
It Could Happen Here is a production of Cool Zone Media. For more podcasts from Cool Zone Media, visit our website, coolzonemedia.com, or check us out on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find sources for It Could Happen Here updated monthly at coolzonemedia.com/sources. Thanks for listening.
Hi, it's Jill Winterstein, host of the Spirit Daughter podcast, where we talk about astrology, natal charts, and how to step into your most vibrant life. And today I'm talking with my dear friend, Krista Williams.
It can change you in the best way possible. Dance with the change, dance with the breakdowns.
The embodiment of Pisces intuition with Capricorn power moves.
So I'm like delusionally proud of my chart.
Listen to the Spirit Daughter podcast starting on February 24th on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
I'm Clayton Echard. In 2022, I was the lead of ABC's The Bachelor.
But here's the thing. Bachelor fans hated him.
If I could press a button and rewind it all, I would.
That's when his life took a disturbing turn. A one-night stand would end in a courtroom.
The media is here. This case has gone viral.
The dating contract.
Agree to date me, but I'm also suing you.
This is unlike anything I've ever seen before.
I'm Stephanie Young. Listen to Love Trapped on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Special Agent Regal, Special Agent Bradley Hall.
In 2018, the FBI took down a ring of spies working for China's Ministry of State Security, one of the most mysterious intelligence agencies in the world.
The Sixth Bureau podcast is a story of the inner workings of the MSS and how one man's ambition and mistakes opened its vault of secrets.
Listen to The Sixth Bureau on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Amanda Knox, and in the new podcast, Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby, we unpack the story of an unimaginable tragedy that gripped the UK in 2023. But what if we didn't get the whole story?
Evidence has been made to fit.
The moment you look at the whole picture, the case collapses.
What if the truth was disguised by a story we chose to believe?
Oh my God, I think she might be innocent.
Listen to Doubt, the Case of Lucy Letby on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.